Hey guys, today we're stepping into a hut so cold that your breath fogs up the air before you even close the creaky wooden door. You'd think the inside of a house would be warmer than the outside, but here in a medieval peasant's dwelling that's not always the case. In fact, sometimes it's even worse, like camping in a damp cellar where the only insulation is wishful thinking. You probably won't survive this, or at least not without several layers of scratchy wool, a pile of straw, and maybe a goat or two snoring in the corner. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, comment down below where you're listening from and what time it is. I want to see just how many time zones this little hut of ours stretches across. Now picture this, you duck inside a thatched roof hut built mostly of wattle and daub that is sticks interwoven with mud plaster. It's the kind of architecture that seems charming in a museum reconstruction, but in reality feels like living inside a damp biscuit. The walls are thick enough to keep out wolves, but thin enough to let the wind whistle through every crack. Sometimes it's a low whistle, sometimes a groan, and if you're unlucky it's a shriek that makes you wonder if the devil himself is rattling your door latch. Historians still argue about just how drafty these huts were, but accounts from the period suggest peasants complained about endless winds indoors. Though to be fair, peasants complained about everything, it was sort of their national sport. The floor isn't wood, because that would be a luxury. It's just hard-packed dirt. If you're lucky, you've spread rushes across it. They soak up mud spills and less mentionable fluids, and every so often you replace them, though probably not as often as you should. Some chronicles suggest households changed rushes once or twice a year. Imagine living on the same damp straw mat from one Christmas to the next. The smell alone would keep you awake, which might actually help stave off frostbite. Here's a quirky tidbit: some medieval households did scatter herbs among the floor rushes, things like lavender or mint. Not because they smelled nice, but because people believed they drove away lice and fleas. Whether that worked is debatable. More likely it just meant your fleas had a minty fresh fragrance. Scholars still debate whether herbs were widespread, or more of a wannabe noble trickle-down practice. But one thing's certain, even if you had a sweet-scented floor, the cold air didn't care. It seeped right through. You curl up on your straw bed, shivering. The walls creak, the thatch above you rustles with mice, and the night presses down heavy with silence, broken only by the occasional bark of a village dog. You wrap your cloak tighter, but still the icy air snakes through the seams. Your toes ache. The thought occurs tomorrow night will be just as cold unless you find another trick. But what trick? Well, that leads us right into the next secret peasants relied upon. You peel off your damp outer cloak, not to undress, but to start again. Layering isn't fashion here. It's survival. In a world where rooms breathe out cold like sleeping beasts, the only furnace you can carry is the one you wear. So you build your warmth from the inside out. A coarse linen shift next to your skin to wick away sweat. Yes, you still sweat in winter. Chopping wood does that, a heavier kirtle or tunic over it, then a second tunic if a luck and last harvest allow, then a woolen mantle, then the cloak that still smells like lanolin and rain. You move and the garments whisper a hush of cloth on cloth like a lullaby for the cold. The wind worries at the door. Your breath climbs in little ghost puffs and disappears. Mainstream fact first, wool is your miracle. Its crimped fibres trap air, and even when damp it keeps heat better than anything else you own. Rich folk have finer weaves, but you most years have something sturdy and scratchy that doesn't mind being worked to threads. You run your fingers along the nap of the fabric and feel the faint waxy residue of life lanolin, that sheep's oil signature that repels water, and rumour says keeps the cold at arm's length. Historians still argue whether everyday peasant cloth retained much lanolin after fulling and washing, because regional practices differed wildly, yet every old shepherd you meet swears by the sheep scent shield, and frankly the smell alone might frighten frost away. Bonus, it deters people who want to borrow your cloak. Quirky tidbit. Next, your stockings are not socks the way future people think of socks. In some places you wrap your feet in linen strips or felted scraps like a miniature mummy, then slide them into shoes stuffed with straw or dry moss, an adjustable biodegradable insole. In colder corners you might wear foot wraps like soldiers centuries later taught to fold them just so, because a bad fold means a blister, and a blister means the kind of misery that steals sleep. And if you're lucky, or near trade routes, you might have nail-bound mittens made with a looping technique older than knitting, dense, and almost windproof. The stitchwork tightens with every tug like a promise. The wind finds the chinks in the wattle and daub, and you feel it on your wrists and neck, the places layers forget. So you tie on a coif, that little linen cap that fits like a snug thought under your hood. You wind a scarf, or the medieval cousin of a scarf, a length of wool you tuck into itself so it doesn't betray you to the draught. Over your tunic you belt a second rougher garment. Think apron meets armour to trap one more pocket of air. The trick isn't just stacking fabric, it's making little air chambers that your body can quietly heat. Warmth in this life is architecture you wear. You tug your hood forward. Hoods are small miracles. A good one keeps snow from slipping down your collar, and if you tie it across your face, you make a private weather, where the air is yours. You ruffle the fur-edge rabbit, if you're fortunate sheepskin more likely. The fur holds a cushion of air. It isn't luxury so much as a negotiation with winter. You can almost hear the deal, I'll keep moving and you cold will keep your distance. On nights like this, you put your hands together under your cloak sleeves pulled over your fists and breathe into the cave you've made of your own body. A makeshift bellows. One joke to break the gloom. Congratulations, you've invented personal central heating by becoming your own radiator. In your belt pouch, a lump of tallow for the lamp, a little beeswax if you're fancy, and a smear of something greasy for your cracked knuckles. Goose grease, maybe. People swear by it the way future people swear by miracle creams with seaweed and Latin names. Someone's aunt swears that rubbing goose grease on your chest traps warmth. Someone else insists it draws out bad chills. Historians still argue whether these greases did much besides seal in moisture, but if the ritual helps you sleep, it helps you sleep. And sleep is currency you spend carefully. You think about washing your linen base layer. That would be nice. But washing in midwinter is a puzzle with too many wrong answers. Water freezes in buckets. The stream bites. So you shake the garments, beat the dust out, maybe lay them near warmth, when you can borrow it from the daytime fire. Laundry is a weather window activity, a brief treaty signed on the rare sunny day. Until then, you live by the doctrine of layers. Rotate, refold, rewind. Smell manageable. Comfort negotiable. Survival non-negotiable. Let's slide a little humour under the door with a draft. Your hat is both fashion and lifeline, and no, you do not remove it indoors. You sleep in it too. You might even double hat a linen cap, hugging your skull and a wool cap over that. Heat escapes through the head, not as dramatically as old wives say, but enough that a bare scalp feels like an open window. No open windows tonight. When you lie down later, you'll pull the edge over your eyes and pretend the winter can't see you. To be unseen by the cold is a comforting superstition. A mainstream fact's cousin. Most people in your village have just a few garments repaired, until the seams look like maps of old rivers. You darn your hose with yarn scavenged from worn-out sleeves. You turn a tunic inside out to even the wear. Children wear handed down everything, until handed down becomes handed off to the rag pile, which eventually becomes quilted linings or patchwork wraps. That wrap you tie around your midriff at night. Perhaps it was once a grain sack. Nothing dies. Everything is reborn as insulation. Now for a small stubborn debate, did peasants truly have a separate winter wardrobe, or did they simply add more of the same? Evidence says both, depending on the place and century. Inventories show simple fur-lined garments here, extra cloaks there, and in many spots just clever layering and improvisation. Some scholars point at sumptuary laws and say the poor were restricted from certain materials. Others note that practice often shrugged at paperwork and necessity beats a law when frost climbs in the window. Your village probably lives somewhere in the middle, official rules posted on a church door, unofficial realities stitched under your cloak. The sensory anchor changes tonight, not wind alone, but the rustle and rasp of fabric, the little squeak of dry wool on wool, the creak of your leather belt strap, the soft thud as you set your wooden patterns by the door. You can almost count your layers by sound. Linen murmurs, wool whispers, leather sighs. The hut answers with its own vocabulary, a thatch shiver a beam, settle a mouse's daredevil slide between the rafters. In this lexicon, warmth is a verb, you wear it. You do it, you keep doing it. You glance at your shoes, turn shoes, with thin soles that learn the road as you do. The soles bend. They are not a barricade against cold earth. So you thicken the story inside, straw-felt moss rag whichever character you can cast in the role of insulator. In deep snow, you slip on wooden patterns to lift yourself out of slush, the way future folks lift laptops off desks for airflow, except your fan is the sky and your battery is your toes. 1 or 2 jokes per section you promised yourself. Fine, here's another: you did not buy new boots for winter. You negotiated with winter for continued use of your old boots. Another odd practice heating clothing stones. Not the hearth-warmed bricks will meet later, but little river stones warmed by the day's cooking tucked into mittens or slipped inside your cloak while you mend nets or card wool. Not blazing, just borrowed warmth. Some households rub garments with a bit of oil or fat at wear points, a primitive weatherproofing that saddens future museum conservators but delights your elbows tonight. Historians still argue whether such oiling was common or rare. You just know your elbows don't squeak when you bend. And now the small politics of layers who gets the best. The soundest cloak probably belongs to the person who must face the dark last or first, an elder on watch, a mother who must rise for a crying child, a shepherd called to a lambing in snow. Clothing shuffles like a deck. A sleeve you wore in autumn migrates to a cousin's hood migrates to you. Community is a wardrobe on the move, and warmth is shared by rotation as much as by proximity. The village survives because the village decides to. You test your layers by standing still. Standing still is the real exam because movement forgives bad layering with borrowed heat. Stillness is honest. Your shoulders relax. The cold cannot find you easily. You listen to your heartbeat, a slow drum under wool, and realize this is the music of winter approval. If the drum keeps time without complaint, you've dressed well enough to sleep. But here's the secret you will carry to the bed layers. Help, yes, but layers alone won't save your toes at 3 a.m. When the earth remembers it is stone and the night remembers it is January. You need one more trick the kind peasants whisper with pride because it's as old as straw and as simple as breath. You glance at the sleeping space, at the heap of bedding, at the shapes you'll share it with, and understand that warmth isn't just woven, it's gathered. And the place you gather it is where you're going next. You lower yourself onto the straw bed and the whole room changes sound. The floor had its grunt, your cloak had its whisper, but straw has a music, all its own little squeaks like field mice playing violins, and a papery rustle that reminds you of summer fields now sleeping under snow. The mattress is not really a mattress, it's a pilass, a tick basically a big cloth sack stuffed with straw rye, or oat chaff, whatever the harvest left over after feeding mouths and beasts. You press your palm into it and the bed gives way, then springs back with stubborn optimism as if to say, yes, I am sticks, but I will try to be clouds. You settle. The tick exhales dust and the dry, sweet smell of last August. Mainstream fact first, straw bedding was the commoner's pillow mattress, and sometimes private pantry for crumbs and lost buttons. In many huts you'd have a low platform or simply a corner cleared and ringed with timber to keep the straw corralled. Wealthier folk might sleep on rope-sprung frames with a stuffed mattress, but for peasants across centuries straw was standard replaced when vermin damp, and a certain crunchy melancholy said it was time. Some parishes kept civic rules about when to change bedding. Others trusted noses and the sudden enthusiasm of fleas. You lie there feeling the tick beneath you shift as each stalk finds its angle. Comfortable, in a practical way, yes. Better than bare earth. Kinder than a bench, and most importantly a trap for warm air. Quirky tidbit next, you don't just sleep on straw, you curate it. People slip aromatic bits into the mix when they can rue and wormwood to snub pests, mint or lavender, to sweeten the night even dried juniper if a neighbour had a busy hedge. Whether it truly chased lice is up for debate. What it did for your dignity is measurable. Pulling a blanket to your chin while breathing something that isn't a barnyard bouquet might be the finest luxury you taste all week. Another small trick, some folks arrange straw in layers, long straw below, chaffier fluff above, so the softest part greeted your bones. You adjust your hip and feel the logic of that little engineering degree in agriculture. You angle your body into the long narrow hollow carved by sleep after sleep. Beds learn their owners. This one knows exactly where your shoulder prefers to tuck and where your knees like to fold. The linen sheet, if tonight is a sheet night, is rough more memory than fabric in places, but honest. You pull the blanket wool patched faithful up to your ears, then leave just enough window for your mouth and nose to fog the air inside. Your breath becomes a small hearth. You inhale warmth, you had just exhaled a loop of comfort no landlord can tax. This is the physics peasants trust most shared breath and trapped heat. And speaking of sharing, this bed is not just yours, it is a team sport. Parents pack on the outside, children tucked in the middle like embers under ash-older kin on the warm side of the draft. Sometimes 2 families share one big platform in a bad year. Sometimes a traveller wedges near the feet for the night. The etiquette is simple. Face away, knees curled, breathe politely. Little jokes bloom even in the dark. Someone murmurs that grandfather's snores are church bell practice, and you try not to laugh because laughter lets the cold in. But humour helps sleep do its shy work. You shift again, and the straw answers with that shy violin squeak. You're all instruments warming by concert. Let's lift a historical lantern over the idea that beds were rotten, flea-ridden dens every single day. Historians still argue about overall cleanliness. On the one hand, there are sermons complaining about slovenly households that never change rushes or straw. On the other, inventories and court records list bed linens, bolsters and blanket counts that suggest more variation and pride than the caricature allows. Some regions practice seasonal grape washings, turning out bedding to sun bleach when possible. Others relied on frequent beating and airing. Your village lives somewhere between not spotless, not squalid, just busy, cold and practical. The bedding gets its day in the sun when the sky remembers being generous. You try a tiny wriggle to test the heat lock. The trick with straw is to move like a cat needing a lap just enough to puff up the fibres and trap another ounce of air not enough to open a cold tunnel. Then you settle. Layer by layer you build a cave straw under linen against skin wool, above a cloak thrown across feet, hats on heads, hands tucked in sleeves. In this cave your breath clouds in a soft rhythm you can count. Tonight's sensory anchor is breath itself, the huff and hush, the faint damp warmth that beads on the inside of your cap the way your chest makes a small tent of the blanket and then lets it fall. The hut creaks, your breath answers. The cold waits outside, drumming its fingers on the door lintel. Here's a half joke told across centuries. Someone claims that sleep tight comes from tightening bed ropes. Peasant beds like yours often don't have ropes at all, just straw heaps or simple slats. Rope-laced frames were more common in better-off homes. Still, the phrase has grip because the image is tidy, pulling cords to make the night firm. Historians still argue about the origin, but you can imagine the ritual: tighten ropes, tuck corners, nod to the universe, try to keep dreams from falling through. In your hut, the corresponding ritual is fluffing the straw, tamping down the cold, and telling children to keep their feet to themselves, which they will not do. Now for another odd practice: nightcaps and shared covers create something like a family weather system. Breathing under one blanket humidifies the microclimate, making it feel warmer than the raw number would suggest. In deep winter, some households even spread a second tick lightly filled over the top, creating a straw duvet. Others use a spare cloak, a patched sail, a treated hide. If you've ever wondered whether a tattered banner can warm a small boy, consider that bad harvest. A few years ago it did, and someone patched the holes with cloth that once belonged to a wedding dress. In desperate seasons, all fabric becomes kin. Your mind drifts to lice and flees the gossip nobody wants to admit. You check your collar. Tonight seems calm. A little mint in the straw helps your courage, if not the insects. Some households kept the bed area slightly raised to discourage damp and crawling visitors. Others sprinkled ashes in a thin line around the sleeping corner, as if warding off more than bugs. Superstition and sanitation shake hands. They do that a lot in winter. Historians still argue whether the ash trick worked or was simply theatre. But theatre matters in the dark. It soothes the audience. You listen to the bed's conversations, a baby's sleepy sigh, a teenager's stubborn toss, the double thump of two adults finding a truce with the straw's pokes. The smell is part barn, part clean cold, part wool, with a note of last night's porridge on someone's sleeve. The bells in the distance, the church, the watch count the hours like a slow heartbeat in stone. Midnight is a grey word in here. It doesn't arrive, it gathers. Mainstream fact's cousin. Many medieval households practice bundling infants tightly before sleep, not just for warmth, but to keep limbs safe in crowded beds. The swaddled baby goes between adults, or against the mother's side, a warmth-sharing knot in the family rope. Quirky tidbits: some midwives recommended warming the swaddling cloth near the hearth at dusk, and then sealing that heat inside layers an echo of the hot stone trick we'll meet later. Whether this was widely practiced is debated, but your neighbour swears by it, and her babies look like sleepy loaves fresh from an oven you do not own. You edge your cold feet toward the place where someone else's shins have already made a temperate zone. No words, just a tilt of blanket and the silent treaty of winter: we share heat, or we share funeral bread. A little humour to soften the gloom: someone farts, and for a second the bed is a parliament in uproar, muffled giggles. A saints preserve us, then quiet returns. Even jokes are a kind of insulation. Laughter changes how a night fits. A thought floats up like a spark. Are you poor because you share a bed, or do you share a bed because you are clever? Tonight the bed feels like strategy, not shame. In a place where walls leak winter, the human body is both problem and solution. Historians still argue about how often unrelated adults shared sleeping spaces out of necessity. Your village knows the answer by memory, not manuscript. When the river freezes hard enough to sing, nobody sleeps alone unless they must. You adjust your cap and look toward the door. There's a draught where the threshold sulks. You could stuff it with more straw. You will at dawn. For now, you listen to the straw's small talk and your breath's slow rehearsal for dreaming. The bed holds. The night holds. You're almost warm. But almost at 3 a.m. becomes not quite, and not quite is the hour when toes complain and courage considers taking up a second career. You'll need help from someone or something larger than a heap of plants and a pile of relatives. And just then you hear it, a low familiar huff, a heavy step near the wall, the promise of a different kind of heat making its way inside. The sound comes again, slow, weighty, like a polite drumbeat on the earth. You lift the edge of the blanket and watch your breath mingle with another kind, a pale, steady cloud rising from the dark shapes along the wall. Cows. Their bodies are night lanterns that run on grass, each one a quiet furnace wrapped in hide. You breathe in hay and warm animal, a smell that means winter might tolerate you for one more evening. In the hush, a bell stitched to a leather collar gives a sleepy clink, and a hoof shifts, thudding the packed floor with the confidence of someone who never wonders where their next blanket is coming from. Mainstream fact first, in much of medieval and early modern Europe, people and animals commonly shared a building, sometimes literally the same room, often the same long structure, with only a low partition, a half wall or a change in floor level between the byre, the animal end, and the house end. In some regions the living area was slightly higher, so liquid from the byre drained away from the sleeping place. In others the animals were a step up and you learned to respect gravity. Northern longhouses, alpine byre dwellings, North Sea farmsteads, all variants on the same thesis. Warmth is a neighbourhood project, and the cow is your steadfast neighbour, who pays the rent in heat. A full-grown cow exhales warmth like a kettle that never boils dry. 2 cows and a pig. Congratulations, you've installed radiant heating. It moos occasionally. You sit up, had a skew, and study the winter math. Animals produce heat at a blessedly predictable rate, and their sheer mass stabilizes the night's cold swings. Their breath lifts in plumes that bead along the thatch and timbers. The room's air, still cool, becomes less cruel. A goat huffs, rearranging itself into the universal goat shape, compact smug, as if it personally wrote the handbook on survival. Someone once joked that if a cow could knit, it would have finished your blanket by Michaelmas. Sadly, cows do not knit. They do, however, warm your bones by existing, which is a kind of compassion you wish some people would emulate. Quirky tidbit, next cats are living foot warmers with purr-side benefits, and they absolutely know it. A village cat makes the rounds at bedtime like a tax collector of affection, settling on whichever pair of ankles conveys the highest credit rating in scritches. In some households, a basket of sleeping hens is brought near the wall at night, feathered lanterns that condense a pocket of warmth and pay out in eggs by morning. There are stories, half joke, half gospel, of swaddled piglets tucked close to a cold infant in emergencies, the piglet squealing its editorial comments while saving a skin of life. Historically common practice, debated, possible in a pinch. Oh, absolutely. Nothing screams we're inventing comfort on hard mode like a bed that clucks, purrs, and occasionally oinks. You tilt your head and listen to the barn end orchestra. Soft cud chewing, the leather-muffled jingle of a strap, the thick loaf-like sigh of a sleeping cow. Tonight's sensory anchor is this animal breath, damp and steady, turning the cold air from razor to river, something that flows around you rather than cuts through you. Your own breath joins it, a lesser instrument in a gentle choir. The timbers overhead creak when a gust shouldered the thatch, and the cow answers with a tail flick as if to say, "Not my problem, friend, I brought the radiator." Practicalities hide inside this coziness. Manure happens, there's the polite way to put it. The byre end gets mucked out in the day, and fresh straw is spread, a ritual of dignity for beast and human both. The bedding under animals litter soaks and composts at a glacial pace, giving off a touch of heat if there's enough depth, like a sleeping compost pile. Historians still argue how much households relied on that compost warmth in the living area. In some places, the compost stayed mostly in the byre, in others thick-packed litter. Underfoot in the living half made a crude warm floor through winter. Your village's method, the one that works this year. Peasants are engineers of this will do. Another small debate: were families intimately shoulder to shoulder with animals, or was there always a clean divide? Archaeology, legal records, and travellers' accounts say yes, no, and it depends. Plenty of houses show a threshold stall, partitions even aloft to you above animals below. Elsewhere, nothing but habit and good sense marks the boundary. Social status, region, and season all tweak the answer. Your hut tonight has a waist-high plank wall just enough to keep a curious cow muzzle from snuffling your blanket while still letting the heat tiptoe over. The plank has teeth marks. Someone has been negotiating. You pull the blanket up and imagine tomorrow's chores in the animal end, nursing a cow with a cough, teasing out a burr from a tail, checking hooves for ice shaking out fodder. The animal corner is not just a furnace, it's a pantry on legs. Milk turns to butter and cheese, a bank account you can spread on bread. Dung becomes fuel in places where wood is scarce dried, and shaped into little moons that smoulder like stubborn promises. Historians still argue how widespread dung fuel was in your exact century and county, but the smell of slow-burning cakes is a known winter perfume in many dry regions and timber-poor zones. You wrinkle your nose now imagining it. Later you'll be grateful. A quick laugh for the darkness. The rooster who is terrible at clocks decides to practice a preview crow sometime after midnight. He gets shushed by an elderly aunt with a voice like gravel and a theological argument against premature dawns. The rooster sulks, the cow does not care, the goat edits a hay bale with extreme prejudice. You smother your grin in the blanket to keep the microclimate intact. Humour is a draft stopper you carry in your chest. You study the architecture born of animal lives. Low eaves keep heat from racing upward. Small windows refuse to be generous to the wind. The door opens into the byre, not your bed, because beasts bring in winter on their backs, and someone decided long ago where the snow should fall. A loft, if you have one, holds hay, and sometimes humans, the hay acting like a thick duvet for the house. In some valleys, people literally sleep above the byre ladder up breath down all night, a negotiation between gravity and warmth. The timbers remember generations of snores. There's a rhythm to nights like this, last check of tether and stall, last murmur to the good milkers, last look at a pregnant ewe with the moontide look in her eyes. You make a mental note to rise if she rises. Sharing a building makes you a better listener. You learn the difference between I am shifting and I'm troubled, between I dropped my cud and I am meeting a wolf in my imagination. If danger prowls the yard, the animals are your bells. If a storm changes its mind, they know before the shingles do. You could say you sleep with alarm set to cow. Another quirky detail, some households warmed stones in the animal litter. Never too hot, always wrapped, stealing back in a clean bundle a little of the heat the beasts gave off. A homegrown hot water bottle with no water at all. Was it common? The sources are scattered, the practice plausible. You tuck that idea into your mental pocket next to cat-acquired ankle heater and chicken-based microclimate. Now for the joke you didn't mean to tell out loud, if cows are radiators, does that make the pig a space heater? Someone on the bed snorts firmly awake. You both try not to laugh, because laughter shakes blankets, and shakes blankets leak heat. This is the comedy of scarcity, nothing wasted, including chuckles which must be folded and put away neatly after use. The night leans forward. You count the breaths, yours, cows, goats, the slow chorus that holds the cold outside like a board usher. Historians still argue whether the animal sharehouse was born mostly of climate theft risk or convenience. In your bones, the answer is yes. Heat protection, and the kind of convenience that means a calving at 2 a.m. is down a handful of steps, not a stumbling sprint across ice. You listen for the telltale grunt of labour, and hear only contentment. Yet comfort has its tax. The air is warmer but wetter. Frost crystals lace the thatch above the animal end, and when the fire, if there had been one earlier in the day, sent smoke up into the low roof, the soot married that damp, and made a black sticky genealogy in the rafters. No fire tonight, but the house still remembers smoke from better hours. The roof remembers snow from outside and breath from inside, and it holds them both like secrets tucked under straw. You settle back, grateful and a little itchy with the knowledge of muck you will shovel tomorrow. Your last waking thought is a carpenter's thought you learned by sleeping here. Warmth rises and gathers where it can, and a house can be taught to hold it if you speak to the roof in the right materials. You look up through the dim and think about the thatch, about why it keeps out rain. yet welcomes the small miracles of trapped air, about why mice love it, and why you must learn to love it anyway. The cows sigh, the bell clinks, the roof answers with a soft rustle. You're a thread in a tapestry of heat and breath and straw, and the next lesson in staying warm is whispering just above your head, waiting for a curious hand and a careful eye to lift it. The roof above you has its own logic, a stitched sky of thatch, bundled reeds, straw, heather, or whatever your valley's harvest left behind. From the outside it looks like a shaggy haircut for a house, uneven but intentional, each tuft angled to shrug off rain and snow. From the inside it is shadow and muffled sound, a ceiling that hisses softly when sleet peppers the roof and creaks like an old elbow when wind leans too hard. You can smell it if you lie still long enough, a dry grassy ghost of summer that clings to the air even in February. For a peasant's family, the thatch is not simply a roof. It is a companion, a shield, and a culprit, both protector and troublemaker. Mainstream fact first, thatched roofs, while often mocked by later chroniclers, as poor folks' architecture, were brilliant insulators. The densely packed bundles trapped air, keeping out driving snow and slowing the bite of wind. In summer, they reflected heat, giving cool shade. In winter, they offered a surprising buffer against icy blasts. Archaeologists and ethnographers note that well-maintained thatch could last decades, sometimes up to half a century, though constant patching was the rule. To a medieval household, maintaining the thatch was as regular a task as mending clothing or sharpening a scythe. Yet the blessing came with curses. The same thatch that trapped air also trapped smoke. If you had a fire smouldering earlier in the day, even a small cooking fire that has long since gutted out the roof would hold its memory. The hut fills with the ghost of smoke that clings to your cloak, hair, even your skin. To some this was safety. Smoke drove out insects, preserved timbers, even darkened the thatch so it resisted rot. To others it was misery eyes that stung lungs, that rasped babies, that coughed through the night. Historians still argue over the balance. Did smoke-filled huts cause chronic illness? Or did they paradoxically prevent worse fates by killing pests and preserving the structure? Evidence points both ways, leaving modern scholars in the same fog you are breathing now. Quirky tidbit, nextbirds love thatch. Sparrows, starlings, jackdaws, whole neighbourhoods of feathered squatters move in tugging strands to weave their own homes. On some mornings you wake to a chorus from the ceiling that is half lullaby, half racket. Their nests sometimes drop mites down into the beds below, leading to itchy superstitions about roof spirits nibbling your scalp. Children might collect the fallen eggshells as charms. In certain folk tales, birds nesting in your roof meant prosperity. In others, it foretold laziness because clearly you hadn't patched well enough. The debate wasn't just among storytellers. Villagers could argue about whether to drive out the birds or let them stay for luck. Tonight's sensory anchor is that roof, the faint rustle, as a mouse scuttles through bundles, the occasional plink of thaw drip, slipping between stems, the soft sift of snow, loosening and sliding down. You almost think the roof breathes with you, inhaling the night, exhaling a hush. And yet there's danger here too. A stray ember, a tipped lamp, even lightning could turn the entire roof into tinder. Chronicles are full of laments about village fires spreading from hut to hut in minutes. Some towns even forbade open flames during certain dry months. Without fire tonight you have dodged that peril, but you remember the whispered warnings, better to freeze than to burn. This double-edged truth makes you watch the thatch with uneasy gratitude. There's a joke someone mutters in the dark. At least the mice above us are warm. You chuckle quietly, though you hope none decide to fall into your bedding. Another joke says that birds in the thatch were the medieval version of noisy neighbours, in an apartment upstairs always scratching, never quiet when you want them to be. Humour again is a small blanket over the bigger worries. As the night deepens, you reflect that the roof is both ceiling and archive. Every layer of thatch remembers seasons: the drought year when bundles were thinner, the storm year when repairs came twice in 1 month, the year the neighbours gathered to help after lightning split the ridgepole. You stare into the dark weave above you and see history written in stalks and shadows. Scholars argue whether peasant roofs were haphazard patchworks or carefully managed systems. You know that they are both depending on whether you've had help money or mercy that year. The wind shifts. Snow rattles against the thatch, then slides in a sheet that hisses down to the yard. For a moment you wonder if the roof will hold all winter. Will the next storm find the weak seam? You close your eyes and press deeper into the straw, feeling the animals breathe the family stir. The roof has kept you so far, but the night has more lessons, and one of them waits in the heavy damp silence of the stone walls pressing close around you. The walls hug you close, but it is not the embrace of a friend. These walls are stone thick and ancient, cool to the touch in summer and bone-soaking in winter. From outside they look strong, impenetrable, to wolves raiders, and the casual insult of the wind. Inside, though, they reveal a different character, damp, reluctant, a fortress against enemies but not against the cold. You lean back against one and feel the chill travel up your spine like an uninvited guest. The wall does not warm for anyone. Mainstream fact first, many medieval peasant houses, especially in regions with good stone quarries, were built with rough-hewn rock and mud mortar. They were sturdy against weather, but they breathe differently from wood. Stone absorbs moisture, holds it, and releases it as a cold mist that never quite leaves the air. Even centuries later, visitors to reconstructed huts often remark on the damp chill inside, even on sunny days. Strong walls saved lives during sieges and storms, but at night they were as cold as an extra winter. The damp makes itself known in little ways. Your blanket smells faintly of mildew. Your shoes, even when left by the hearth during the day, feel clammy by dawn. Your joints ache more than your years should demand. Scholars note that chronic rheumatism and lung troubles were common in households that lived close to stone and damp. Yet the same scholars also admit that people had few alternatives. Timber was not always available or affordable, and stone walls were insurance policies against wolves, thieves, and sudden winds. The irony was sharp. What kept you alive also made you shiver. Quirky tidbit, in some places families plastered their stone walls not just with clay, but with mixtures that included animal dung hair and even blood from slaughtered animals, each believed to add a certain binding or insulating property. To modern ears it sounds grotesque, but to peasants it was simple chemistry. Whatever kept the draft out was good. Imagine explaining to your children that their bedroom wall had cow hair in it. Suddenly bedtime stories take on a new texture. The damp also encouraged other quiet roommates, mold, mildew-creeping insects that found niches in the gaps. People hung herbs and rushes against the walls to mask the smell, believing sage or rosemary could drive away not only spirits but spores. Historians still argue whether these aromatic defences were effective or mostly symbolic. Was it proto-medicine or placebo wrapped in tradition? Probably both. But when you lay your head against a wall that smells faintly of thyme, you might sleep easier even if the mould ignores your prayers. Tonight's sensory anchor is the stone itself. Run your hand along its face and you feel tiny grains come loose sand against skin. Tap it and it answers with a dull inward thud, as if echoing from some colder chamber beyond. At night, when frost climbs outside, the wall creaks and shifts. Some swear they hear whispers in those sounds, the murmurs of ancestors or spirits locked in rock. More likely it is just physics stone adjusting to cold, but in the dark physics and folklore often blur. A little humour slips in the wall might be damp, but at least it doesn't snore like your uncle. Someone in bed jokes that the only warmth the wall ever gave them was the warmth of anger. You laugh softly because laughter pushes back the chill. Scholarly debate lingers too. Were stone houses warmer overall than wooden huts? Some argue yes, the sheer thickness meant once heated they retained warmth. Others say no, the damp outweighed the benefit and only upper-class stone manors with big fires could truly profit. For peasants it depended on maintenance, climate and luck. Tonight luck is thin. The wall leans its cold cheek against yours and you sigh. Still walls gave safety and safety was priceless. No wolf would claw through stone. No thief would so easily break down a heavy lintel. You think of all the generations who leaned on these same walls, who traded comfort for security, who whispered their stories into the cracks. Perhaps the wall remembers all of them. Perhaps the chill is simply the memory of centuries. You close your eyes, nestle deeper into your bedding, and promise yourself you will ignore the clammy air. But there's a truth you cannot shake: warmth. Real warmth cannot come from walls. It must be made elsewhere, by family, by food, by tricks passed down like secret charms. And tomorrow night you'll test one of those tricks, something humbler than stone, something peasants swore by when walls betrayed them. You don't go to bed, you join it. That's the feeling when the room dims and the house agrees without ceremony that night has arrived. No one announces bedtime because time has been soft ever since the sunset, and in winter the dark has seniority. You slide under the covers into a geometry that has already been drawn by bodies' parents on the windward edge to intercept drafts, children stitched down the centre, like the warm seam of a loaf, an elder on the lee side where the wall's damp is least treacherous. The bed itself is less a piece of furniture than a small village if a village could be horizontal. Mainstream fact first, for most peasants, communal sleeping was normal. Not just couples, but whole families. And in lean years, a lodger, a cousin between homes, or a farmhand finishing the last weeks of harvest repairs might be welcomed onto the edge. Beds were wide platforms or nested ticks on the floor. Privacy was a curtain if you were lucky, or turned back if you weren't. Nightshirts' linen shifts doubled as daywear foundations, and hats remained loyally on heads because heat would rather escape than mind its manners. Guides and sermons from the later Middle Ages grumble about immodest arrangements, but they also betray how widespread such sharing was. The watchword wasn't scandal, it was warmth. Tonight's ritual begins the way it usually does, a murmur of prayers hushed enough not to wake the baby, but clear enough to count blessings and bargains. Spare the animals, spare the bread, spare our bones. Your palm finds the familiar fray in the blanket edge. Your thumb rubs it smooth again, small magic, useless to physics but useful to nerves. The scent is a winter blend, wool oil, straw sugar, a hint of smoke that picked you up earlier and refuses to be put down. In the quiet, you hear the small conversational sounds of a family nestling one last cough, a yawn the size of next week, a whisper from a child bargaining for a better spot. No one wins. The blanket votes. The etiquette of the communal bed is a living constitution. Feet stay on your own continent unless invited elbows retire at sundown, and anyone who turns too enthusiastically must pay damages in shared blanket heat. You angle your legs until they overlap with someone's shins, not romantic, just strategic, creating a thermal bridge that says, "I'll warm your ankles if you warm mine." You are a network now, and networks resist the cold better than lonely nodes. A soft joke drifts across the dark. Whoever steals the blanket owes bread tomorrow. It's a binding contract enforced by morning grins and the remarkable memory of a hungry family. Quirky tidbit, some households kept a bedcent, a tiny carved token or stitched rag doll tucked in the rafters above the sleeping place. It might be a crude figure with a painted dot for an eye, or just a cross made from rushes tied at Candlemas and saved all year. Children were told it watched for nightmares, drafts, and wolves in that order. Was it superstition? Absolutely. Did it work? The children slept. Elsewhere, you might find a small iron knife slipped under the mattress edge iron, being the metal reputed to offend troublesome spirits, or a sprig of rowan above the door. Historians still argue whether these were common or merely local curiosities. The stories remember them more faithfully than the ledgers do. You adjust your cap and listen as the room's tempo slows to quilt speed. Tonight's sensory anchor is the chorus of small shared sounds, the muffled click of a wooden rosary bead under someone's palm, the dry silk rasp of linen caps against the pillow, the cat's timed purr like a treadle turning wool to yarn. Your own breath adopts the rhythm of the bed, which is to say the rhythm of everyone else's lungs. In the wakeful minutes before the first real drowse, there is a village meeting held in silence, who coughs, who sighs, whose knee needs the warmer spot, who will likely wake to check the pregnant ewe, who will dream so vividly that the blanket trembles with it. A small scholarly debate pads to the edge of the mattress, wearing slippers, how communal was communal. Some scholars argue that households frequently hosted unrelated travellers or neighbours in the bed space out of necessity and custom. Others point to moralist complaints as evidence that such mixing was frowned upon, or at least sermon-worthy. The likely truth lying down beside you is pragmatic. When the roads were bad, the night was colder than law, and you had exactly one dry space to offer hospitality, didn't ask the bishop's permission. People minded themselves, turned to the wall, and traded scandal for survival. Warmth is persuasive theology. You're tempted to joke that your bed curtain is the gold standard of privacy, a cabbage leaf draped over a cord, but in better-off homes, real curtains did more than modesty work. They caught draughts and created a warm bubble you could heat with breath and bodies. Peasants imitated this with whatever they had, a spare cloak hung from pegs, a sailcloth from a neighbour's mill stream, even a patched sheet dyed with the leftover infusion from onion skins, the cheapest amber in the world. Behind fabric voices lower, the air thickens and sleep finds you faster. The bed becomes a tent within a house. Children have their own rituals. The smallest get the hot spot in the middle, swaddled just enough to keep flailing arms from launching midnight adventures. Older ones are given missions. Keep your little brother's cap down. Nudge me if grandmother coughs more than twice, pin the corner of the blanket with your knee. Tasks make bravery easier. You remember being given a bedtime job. You still do it now, even if no one asks. It's one way to show the night you're not just waiting to be cold, you're collaborating against it. The communal bed keeps secrets too. Someone whispers a story from the day who bartered eggs for a spindle of yarn whose calf outran the entire street. Laughter shivers the covers, and you hold very still because laughter is a draft. There's a sly, cosy sarcasm available only to those already wrapped up. You call the house a palace, the straw, a feather mattress, the mouse in the thatch, your upstairs neighbour with poor manners. A little levity shifts the mind from cold to company, and company over hours becomes warmth. If future people wonder how peasants slept without fire, the answer is here in the comedy and choreography. There is inevitably the night pea question. A chamber pot, sometimes grandly called a Jordan, sits within cautious reach. No one wants to trek the yard in snow at wolf o'clock. Those with better aim handle their business like diplomats. Those without are sent to the edges by referendum. It's practical, ungentle, and PG-13 in the way life is PG-13, but it keeps toes attached. Historians still argue whether terminology and etiquette varied by region. They did, but they agree on the essential point: winter domesticity had a plumbing plan, however rustic. A second debate nuzzles your ear: were people truly asleep all night? Or did they keep a segmented schedule, what scholars call first sleep and second sleep? You feel the answer in your bones. After a few hours, bodies stir, a whisper of wakefulness passes through the bed, someone checks the animals, someone prays, someone rubs a cramp. The pause is not an interruption, it's intermission. Later the second act begins, often warmer than the first, because the mattress has learned your shape and the blanket has learned your breath. Whether every village named it or no one did, the rhythm exists, and the communal bed knows the choreography. Humour Check the Cat, your unofficial HR department, files a complaint by kneading your calf until you scoot 2 finger widths left, at which point it curls into the vacancy like a liquid blessing. Your job title tonight: assistant to the cat. Benefits include marginally warmer ankles and purr-based white noise. As drowsiness thickens, you realise that ritual is half the warmth. The prayer isn't hot, but it helps. The joke isn't a blanket, but it tucks the mind. The chore list for dawn isn't a stove, but it burns in the right way. You will rise, therefore you can sleep. And still around 3 in the morning, the hour when memory gets long and blankets get short, there's a stubborn cold that sneaks in from the floor and climbs the ladder of your bones. It visits feet first, then knees, then the edges of your spine, an uninvited guest with a talent for timing. That's when the quiet contraptions of winter appear. The clay brick wrapped in cloth. The river stones warmed earlier, the baked tile that pretends to be a small sun. You know them by touch before you see them smuggled into the bed like contraband summer. Someone will slide one toward your toes with a generosity unique to people who also want their own toes to live. And as your ankles lean into that modest star and remember comfort, you understand the next lesson peasants kept in their pocket. Even on the meanest nights, heat can be borrowed and tucked, held and passed like a story told in a whisper and shared hand to hand. You find the first heat with your hands before your eyes do. It's a shy warmth tucked inside cloth and cautious as a mouse. Someone passes you a brick the size of a loaf wrapped in a scrap of linen that smells faintly of hearth and clay. It is not hot. It is reasonable, like a neighbour with good advice. You slide it toward your ankles under the blanket, and the cold, so bold a moment ago, suddenly remembers its manners and takes a respectful step back. Welcome to the midnight economy of stones and tiles, where heat is borrowed in small polite amounts and paid back with careful handling and gratitude. Mainstream fact first: long before rubber hot water bottles or iron radiators, you and your neighbours warmed beds with river stones, baked bricks, roof tiles and fired clay discs. In the evening, while porridge simmered and bread baked, you set a stone near the fire's shoulder, not its heart. A tile rested on the hearth ledge, a brick lounge just inside the oven mouth after the last loaf came out. When the day's cooking ended, the masonry's leftover heat moved into cloth wraps or wooden boxes lined with wool, then into the bed. Pre-warming a pallet softened the first shock of straw. Rescuing cold feet at midnight saved the second sleep. It's conservation by choreography. Heat works twice, first for food, then for flesh. You learn the ritual by touch. Never snatch a stone from flame to blanket, that's how you scorch fabric skin trust, and possibly the thatch above your head. You temper the stone slowly at the fire's fringe, testing with a palm and a quick hissed breath that translates to, let's not ruin the only blanket we own. Wraps matter. A single layer of linen may sting. 2 layers trap a friendly cushion of air. Wool outside linen is best if you can spare it the fibres holding warmth like a careful secret. The goal isn't hot, it's patient. A patient warmth endures from ankles to arches to calves, and back again through the long opinionated hours before dawn. Quirky tidbit families sometimes marked their favourite stones a scratched initial, a soot dot polished with grease, a tiny cross, so the lucky one wouldn't be swapped by accident. People swore one tile held heat longer than its brothers. Was that true, maybe? Stone density and a lifetime of heating cycles could make a small difference, and belief did the rest. Children name them like pets, Ox Ember Hearth Heart. You roll your ankles over yours and decide it's an Ox Night steady, unflashy generous. Tonight's sensory anchor is the little heat itself, a gentle sphere that persuades nearby cloth to relax. The blanket above it grows supple instead of stiff. Your calves unclench at the first suggestion that they have not been abandoned by the living world. The stone smells of the day-smoked bread may be a green stalk that dried in the hearth corner. Your toes, lately unreliable, citizens begin to pay taxes again. The room's air stays cold, but your private weather improves. Inside your blanket, a temperate climate declares independence. A small scholarly debate shuffles in with cold feet. How widespread were purpose-made warming pans and boxes among non-elite households? And did peasants use special tiles or just whatever stones lay in the stream bed? Wills and inventories do list warming pans for middling folk, and later centuries show wooden footstoves in chilly churches, but the poorest left few records beyond stories. Archaeology finds scorched stones in hearth contexts and heat-darkened bed corners. Linking those to nightly routines is guesswork. The safest answer lies where peasants live. You use what you have, and you elevate it by repetition until it becomes tradition. Your neighbour swears by bricks nursed on the oven's lip after baking day. The earthen dome guards heat like gossip, reluctant to let it go. When the door props open and the flour dust floats in the dusk like tame snow, you slide bricks near the arch to drink the fading glow. Later they travel wrapped and reverent to the beds like nobles escorted through a curtained hall. Historians still argue whether communal oven schedules allowed most households to do this regularly, or if it was a prize of those closest to the bakehouse bell. In your village, the schedule is a dance. You trade small favours for small warmths, and everyone gets a turn if the weather is mean enough. Another clever habit appears in colder weeks. You slip the warmed stone into a little wooden chest with a hinged lid, and drilled holes a pocket stove you can rest at the feet, or tug closer while mending a sleeve. The box keeps curious toddlers from touching the heat directly and keeps the stone from kissing stray straw. Some nights a smaller stone rides inside a clay jug, the jug swaddled and passed around like a sleepy chick. Was that universal? Hardly. Was it ingenious? Completely. Peasants are engineers whose patents are written in splinters and soot. A joke noses out from under the blanket you claim you've invented portable central heating, and that the patent office will send a monk by morning. Someone snickers. Another mutters, "Charge admission for the toes." Laughter is allowed briefly, then embargoed to conserve the thermal treaties you've negotiated with the blanket. The stone circle expands a thumb width. You nudge it, and the heat follows like a well-behaved dog. If you drift toward the edge, you herd it back with a knee. It is shepherding of a new flock ewe lambs and a brick named Ox. Mainstream facts cousin shepherds and night watch use similar tricks outdoors. A flat stone heated at dusk, tucked under a cloak at the small of the back while you pace the field edge. In some places, a tiny iron pot of embers capped with a perforated lid made a poor man's brazier, the ancestor of church footstoves. But embers are unruly in cramped wooden houses stuffed with straw. Your family prefers the obedient silence of brick. Fire is a daylight glory and a midnight liability. Care always. You feel for any scorch on the wrap. None. You check the blanket above. Safe. On the far edge of the bed, an elder borrows a smaller stone for aching knees. "It's the only sermon I can sit through," she says, and the joke lands because everyone has endured frozen homilies between stone walls. Historians still argue whether church cold shortened sermons, or whether memory shortens them afterward. You only know warmth converts sinners faster than any homily. The warmth softens more than muscle. It loosens thought. Your mind, a stiff hinge all evening, swings open a little. You remember fields green and noisy. You remember summer's heat as something you complained about, which proves humans are unreliable narrators. Your stone cools shyly like a singer ending a verse and waiting for someone else to take the next line. You pull it closer to your arches and thank all the nameless hands who taught you this quiet technology generation by generation, 1,000 little lessons added like quilt patches until they covered the night. One more debate hums at the edge of sleep: did people regularly pre-warm entire beds with stones before anyone lay down, or mostly heat feet during the gap between first sleep and second? Later diaries praise pre-warming. Earlier sources are coy. In practice, you do both when fuel and time allow. Tonight there was barley to hull a goat to persuade a latch to mend. The pre-warm didn't happen. But the midnight rescue did, and sometimes that's when you most need it. When second sleep feels far away and the wind remembers your name. You test the remaining heat with your fingers, fading but friendly. You tuck the brick near a child's feet where small toes measure temperature with seeking motions. Sharing heat is the unofficial peasant creed practiced without meeting minutes or motto. The blanket eases again, the room's breath finds one tempo, and the roof's rustle returns to its unthreatening hush. The stone has given back what the oven could spare, and you repay it with gratitude and the promise to rewarm it tomorrow if the weather keeps being itself. Your eyes get heavy. Somewhere beyond the wall, the stream cracks thin ice and argues with itself. Somewhere in the loft, a sparrow reconsiders sleep. Inside, your ankles hum with the modest luxury of not hurting. You drift toward the pause between first sleep and second, the little intermission when people murmur tuck and settle anew, feeling almost clever for having stolen a crumb of sun for the worst hour. 2 jokes were enough. Now the hut prefers silence. But cleverness is a coin with 2 sides, and the night keeps exact accounts. Stones fade. Blankets cool. Even shared breath thins when the door swallows a gust. You will need warmth, not just at your toes, but inside you. Something sipped. Something spooned. Something that glows from throat to belly and then politely radiates outward. The kitchen corner dark now holds that promise in crocks and cups. And when the bed stirs again, you will reach for it, because the next lesson in winter, comfort waits steaming in a wooden bowl. You wake at the midpoint between first sleep and second, that odd twilight of the night, when the room seems half dream and half duty. The air is still cold, though less ferocious now, and you realize that sometimes warmth is not something wrapped around your body, it is something swallowed, something carried inside you like a lantern. In a hut without fire, your hearth must become your belly. Mainstream fact first, medieval peasants relied heavily on internal warmth, meaning food and drink that gave the body a temporary furnace. Gruel porridge or broth simmered earlier in the day could be ladled out before bed, its heat lingering long after the embers faded. Ale and weak beer brewed in every household were staples not just for hydration, but for a sense of warmth that crept outward from the stomach. Even small amounts of mead or spiced wine at festivals served the same purpose. Modern nutritionists would say it was calories doing the real work. Peasants simply knew that a hot meal before bed made the night shorter and the straw softer. Quirky tidbits some households swore by garlic and onions eaten raw before sleep because they heated the blood and kept the chill away. Was this effective? Perhaps only in the sense that no one wanted to get too close to your breath under the blanket. In some regions, mulled ale with herbs like sage or rosemary was considered a charm against winter illness. You sip it and feel for a short while that the cold has been tricked into retreat. Even children were sometimes given warm milk mixed with honey, the medieval version of cocoa without the cocoa. Tonight's sensory anchor is taste and smell. Imagine the steam rising from a wooden bowl, curls of vapour carrying the scent of barley root vegetables, maybe a shred of pork fat if fortune smiled that week. You cradle the bowl in your hands until your fingers thaw, sip slowly, and feel the warmth spill into your chest. The hut may still whisper with draughts, but inside you a small fire begins to glow, fed by nothing more exotic than oats and water. Historians still argue whether peasants often had enough surplus to dedicate food purely to nighttime comfort. Some say yes, because gruel was so cheap and endless that it appeared at nearly every meal. Others argue no, pointing to records of famine, years when even barley husks were precious. The truth likely shifted with the harvest cycle. Some winters you slept with a belly humming gently from hot mash. Others you sucked your teeth in the dark and hoped morning came quickly. Jokes slip through even here. Someone mutters that the ale is liquid blanket, and another replies that if you drink too much you'll need the chamber pot before dawn, which ruins all the warmth you've built. Everyone chuckles in muffled tones, knowing the truth of it. Humour makes the food warmer, or at least the night shorter. You think of feasts, the rare days when fires blazed and meat turned on spits, when spiced wine steamed in big pots, and the whole village glowed from within. Compared to that, your little bowl seems humble. But humility is also survival. You know that warmth doesn't need to be grand to be effective. It just needs to get you from one hour to the next. As your eyelids grow heavy, you notice that food's warmth is fleeting. Already the glow begins to fade, leaving only memory. You pull the blanket tighter, grateful for the borrowed fire in your belly. But tomorrow night may not offer such comfort. What if the gruel pot is empty? What if the ale barrel runs dry? Then you will need something else to keep the dark away. Something less tangible but no less powerful. The sounds of bells, the calls of watchmen remind us that even in the coldest night the world does not sleep entirely. The night is never perfectly still, even when the fire has gone cold. You lie there half between first and second sleep and realize that sound itself becomes a kind of company. The hut breathes, the thatch shifts above you. The walls murmur with damp, the cows huff in their corner, but beyond these private noises the wider village keeps its own rhythm. You hear it carried on the frosted air, the deep rolling voice of church bells and the thin scattered voices of watchmen making their rounds. Mainstream fact-first bells were central to the medieval soundscape. They rang for worship, of course, but also for timekeeping and community safety. Monastic bells mark the canonical hours summoning monks to prayer. Village bells called people to mass or warned of fire. At night, even in small parishes, a bell might toll for curfew or for a death, its resonance sliding across fields and roofs, like a reminder that the community never really slept. For peasants tucked into straw and wool, the bell was both lullaby and alarm, letting you know that time marched forward and someone somewhere was awake enough to count it. Quirky tidbit watchmen patrolling the streets sometimes called out the hour, partly to prove they were awake, partly to ward off thieves or spirits. Past midnight all is well, they might sing out, their voices cracked from cold. In some towns they even carried little horns or rattles, shaking them into alleyways as if scaring mischief away by sheer noise. In villages without formal watchmen, it might be a neighbour on rotation, one unlucky farmer taking his turn, pacing the dark ears sharp for wolves near the sheepfold or sparks in the thatch. Their footsteps crunching on snow became the soundtrack of borrowed security. Tonight's sensory anchor is sound, the distant bell's long echo rolling like thunder across frozen air. The measured crunch of boots on frost, the occasional bark of a dog answering a patrol call. These noises filter into your hut in faint threads, stitching you to the world outside. You may be shivering in your bed, but the bell assures you that you're not alone. It is a subtle warmth, not of body but of mind, that tells you others keep watch while you rest. But there is also unease. Bells could signal more than time. A hurried peal might mean fire attack or even a storm warning. Watch calls could bring news of strangers at the gate. A voice crying out the hour was reassuring unless it stopped. Then the silence itself became suspicious, a blank that made you sit up and listen harder. Historians still argue how effective these night watches truly were. Were they deterrents, real guardians of safety, or were they rituals, half practical, half symbolic, reminding people that someone was awake to share the fear? Records hint at both arrests and foiled thefts, but also drunken watchmen mocked in complaints. A little humour creeps in. You imagine being the poor fellow assigned to patrol in January, stomping his feet for warmth and shouting the hours to prove he hasn't dozed off. It's the medieval equivalent of working the graveyard shift literally. Some people still say that phrase with a shiver, not realizing its roots stretch back to cold nights, when guards walked the graveyard itself, ensuring no body or body snatcher disturbed the peace. Back in your bed, you roll onto your side and picture the bell tower. The rope sways, the clapper strikes, and sound becomes a shape that folds itself over rooftops and through hedges. Each strike reminds you that dawn is one chime closer. The bells make time real in the dark when your own sense of hours stretches and sags. Without them, the night would feel endless. With them, the night has edges as if framed by invisible lines of bronze music. There is debate among scholars about how peasants understood time. Did they think in hours like monks and watchmen, or in tasks and sensations long enough to milk as long as a candle lasts? Probably both. But bells and watch calls stitch the personal to the communal, pulling you out of your own restless mind and into a shared rhythm. You fall asleep not just because you are tired, but because the bell has told you it is permitted. Someone beside you mumbles in half-sleep that the bell is too loud. Someone else answers, "Better a bell than wolves." The bed chuckles softly and silence returns. You let the sound of the bell fading faint inevitable carry you downward again, yet even as you close your eyes you know the night is not done with you. The bells may guard against thieves and the watch may chase shadows, but the deeper cold is inside in your bones and your breath, and it demands more intimate defences. Tomorrow you'll learn of stranger remedies, herbs steeped in ale, charms hung from rafters, pungent concoctions meant to warm you from within or confuse the spirits outside. And in the dark you can't help wondering, will they work, or will they just make you smell funny? You sit up into the small intermission between sleeps and meet the night at nose level. The air around the bed is a library of smells, wool, straw, cow breath. With a new volume open on the table, a cup that steams like a small prophecy. Tonight's warmth is brewed, not burned. If the hut won't give you a fire, you will coax heat out of leaves and roots and stubborn little seeds that remember summer better than you do. The cup warms your fingertips. The vapour greets your face with a kiss that is half kitchen, half hedge. Mainstream fact first. Medieval households leaned on a simple pharmacopoeia of kitchen and hedgerow herbs for winter comfort. Sage, rosemary, thyme, hyssop, mint, yarrow, and the ever-opinionated garlic and onion. Monastic herbals codified what villagers already practiced. Infusions, teas, decoctions, hardier stuff, simmered longer and spiced ales or possets, warm milk curdled gently with ale or wine, then seasoned. The point was not miracle cures, but modest sensible warmth. A cup that eased a cough, settled a churned stomach-coaxed blood toward chilly fingers, and lent courage to the next hour. The cup in your hand tonight is a village classic warm small beer mulled with crushed sage and a chip of honeycomb strained through a scrap of linen that has seen better theology. You lift it, and the steam lays a green blanket over your face, minty, resinous, faintly sweet. You sip. It is not elegant. It is persuasive. Heat unfurls through your throat like a scroll and arrives at your chest with the authority of someone who knows where blankets are kept. The hut does not get warmer, but you do. Quirky tidbits, some families swore by a pinch of ground mustard in warm ale for stirring the blood, others by a clove-studded onion baked in embers earlier in the day and squeezed into broths at night. In cold, damp places, people rubbed a mix of goose grease and rosemary on chests and wrists, then tied on a strip of warm cloth. Whether the grease warmed anything beyond moods is arguable. The ritual itself, performed by hands that loved you, certainly did. Children learn to tolerate the shine with the same stoicism they reserved for turnip suppers. If you smell like a herb garden in a rainstorm, congratulations, you're seasonally compliant. Tonight's sensory anchor is scent layered the way you layer clothes. First the bright medicinal spear of mint, then sage's woolly seriousness, then the soft as bread sweetness of honey, with a smoky afterthought from the cup that hugged the hearth earlier. You hold the steam under your nose and feel for a moment like a friendly cauldron. Your eyes prickle, not sadness, just time proving it has opinions. On the table the tools of hedge magic wait: a little mortar with a history of pepper, a pestle rubbed smooth by centuries of persuasion, a knife that has cut as much plant as bread. You bruise the rosemary sprig and it answers with a forest. You crack a juniper berry and the room gets small and alpine. If your village is lucky enough to see foreign spice once a year, cinnamon shavings or pepper dust, they will appear tonight like nobles slumming it in your posset. A few grains transform the cup from sensible to saintly, at least in your tongue's excited correspondences. Historians still argue about just how often peasants had access to certain herbs in winter. Monastic gardens kept perennials alive behind walls. Villagers coaxed mint and sage near the house, and dried bundles in autumn rafters. Some years the bundles went mouldy. Sometimes goats discovered an unlatched door and self-medicated. Sometimes snow arrived early and turned your drying day into a damp farce. Documents praise and prescribe herbs. Archaeology shows traces. The lived answer is the peasant one: you used what you had and pretended it was exactly what you wanted. You take a second sip and allow yourself a joke, because good medicine deserves good manners. Dr. Sage will see you now. The cup does not laugh, but someone on the bed snorts and pulls the blanket closer, possibly to escape the audience of your humour, possibly to enjoy the scent you've wafted their way. You promise not to recite the entire herb garden by name like a monk showing off his index. Here is a practice you keep secret from proper people: the midnight crumb. A slice of yesterday's bread toasted earlier at the hearth, until it went brown and brave, then soaked in your hot drink, until it becomes a spoonable comfort called sops. Not fancy, just edible central heating. bread is winter's diplomat. It negotiates between liquid and solid hunger, and sleep, scold, and solace. You take a spoonful and feel your shoulders unclench. Modern comparison time, this is the medieval cousin of late-night instant noodles, if noodles wore a linen coif and said grace. Because winter loves debates. Another one shuffles in with cold boots. Did peasants commonly use pungent or exotic additions like ginger or long pepper? Some ledgers list ginger by the ounce in better-off homes. Some guild rules price pepper like prophecy. For you, spice arrives when a traveller owes a favour, or a cousin returns from market wealthy in crumbs, or the church sells a thimble of heat for feast day charity. You hoard it like stories and use it like punctuation sparingly to make a sentence of flavour. Most nights your spice is local courage, garlic, mustard, horseradish, grated until everyone weeps and then laughs, because crying warms the face. You think of the old woman who taught you to bruise time with the heel of your hand, not crushed child coaxed, and to bless the cup with a circle of steam over the sleeping baby. She claimed steam could teach a room to be kind. Historians might not footnote that, but your nose and nerves remember. You learn to stir clockwise for courage, counterclockwise for calm, not because time obeys your spoon, but because rhythm tames the hour between sleeps. Ritual organises the cold into something that can be negotiated. Herb lore has shadows too. There is a string of little charms above the bed, a plait of garlic, a sprig of rowan from last spring, a scrap of parchment with a short prayer inked crooked. Do they warm? No. Do they ease? Yes, because they argue with fear, and fear is a draught all its own. Historians still argue whether such a potropaic clutter was widespread, or just picturesque in later tellings. The roof beams do not care. They hold your odd museum of hope without complaint. One joke more gentle as a cat's paw, you declare your cup a portable monastery, and someone whispers, then chant more softly, you obey. The cup empties. Heat travels. Your belly becomes a small hearth remembering what it has swallowed. The hut tilts towards sleep again, and still honesty, the warmth will fade. Herbs lend a push, not a season. The cup buys you a chapter, not a book. You set it down by the mortar, the pestle resting like a tired thumb, and listen to the room's breath find one tempo. If tonight's potion was courage, tomorrow's might need to be patience, and patience is brewed differently out of neighbours who bring what you lack, and out of your hands when theirs are empty. The next defence against winter isn't in a cup at all. It's in a knock at the door, a loaf swapped for a blanket, a chicken traded for a coil of good wool, and a visit when someone's thatch fails at midnight. You tuck back under the covers, carrying a garden in your chest. The cat resettles at your ankles, having decided rosemary pairs well with you. The straw sings its papery lullaby. The bell will come again, and the cow will sigh, and your breath will join the hut's slow choir. Between those notes, a new sound arrives. Steps in the snow-low voices at the lintel, the soft rattle of a latch politely tried. In a village where winter is a long conversation, someone has come to speak comfort in the language of hands. You know the sound of help before you see it. Careful feet on crusted snow, a mitten on the latch, a throat cleared in that polite way that means I'm here, not a wolf. You push back the blanket and the cold nips your cheeks, but the doorway offers a different kind of warmth, neighbours breathing steam into the night, each one carrying a small solution to a big season. The village does not own a central heating system. It owns a central habit show up. Mainstream fact for survival in winter depended on mutual aid, formal and informal. Commons provided shared grazing and wood gathering. Parish structures organised alms. Manorial courts scheduled boon work days when neighbours helped with repairs after storms. Guilds and confraternities doled out bread fuel or small cash to members in need. Monasteries and hospitals maintained doles handing out loaves or pottage at set hours. Even in tiny places, the rhythm of lend, borrow, return kept homes stitched together. When roofs failed, people came with ladders and thatch. When someone's stores ran thin, the church porch or a wealthier cottage produced a loaf, a rind, a scoop of peas. No one pretended this was charity without cost. Debts of gratitude are ledgers in their own right. But without this web, winter snapped bones and families alike. The visitors step inside, bringing their weather with them. One sets down a bundle carded wool roped like a small cloud, destined to be spun into warmth before midnight. Another holds a pot wrapped in cloth to herd the heat barley stew with a dignified onion floating like a bishop. A third produces a strip of sturdy linen for your bed's edge, where hands begin to fray fabric by habit. This is the village's version of a repair kit passed around the way future people pass along passwords. You feel the air change as faces and voices fill the room, temperature rising by degrees of companionship. Tonight's sensory anchor is the shared breath, and the sound of a hand's wool squeaking under a spindle, a spoon tapping the rim of a wooden bowl, the thrum of low voices that know when to laugh and when to let silence be a blanket. Quirky tidbits, some parishes kept what folks called a charity chest of oddments, spare blankets, patched cloaks, a cradle, even a travelling warming pan in later centuries loaned out on a first coldest, first served basis. In places without chests, there were church ales and bid ales fundraisers in the porch or in an alehouse, where people literally drank warmth into the community purse. Did a peasant village truly pass around a single warming pan like a saint's relic? In some locales, yes. In others, the relic was a more modest asset, a kettle that didn't leak a decent saw, a ladder with all its rungs. Historians still argue how organised these stores were versus how ad hoc, but you recognise the deeper truth. Even a haphazard net catches a falling neighbour. You pass bowls. The stew is ordinary and therefore holy. The honey brown ale is weak the way it should be for everyday use. It still carries a faint bakery note from malt and the breath of someone else's hearth. You eat and the food explains without words why community works. A single household can stretch thin. 3 households together make a quilt of resources. Someone learned a new way to lash bundles of thatch against sleet. Someone learned how to chink a daub crack with moss and patience. Someone saved a fistful of last summer's mint for lending to coughs. Knowledge moves like heat from centre to edge, until the edge remembers it is also a centre. There is, of course, a bureaucracy of kindness. The reeve keeps an eye on who gleaned extra after harvest. The church wardens keep accounts of candle stubs and loaves. The manor notes who owes a day of help once the storm mends. Your village contains both generosity and tally marks. A practiced sarcasm helps the medicine go down. We're all saints until Lent someone mutters, and everyone smiles because it's true. The point isn't perfection, it's persistence. A small debate pads into the conversation. Wearing snow on its boots, did medieval poor relief reliably reach the poorest? Or did it favour the deserving meaning tidy widows and sober labourers, while sidelining the troublesome records suggest a mix of mercy and moral sorting? A smug sermon here, a sudden overflowing dole there. Historians still argue whether neighbourly help covered gaps left by formal systems, or whether formal systems were the mask of neighbourly help all along. You curled on your straw, and watching stew steam from a borrowed pot know the answer. Your stomach understands the bowl you can reach is the bowl that matters. Someone produces a spindle and the room becomes a miniature spinning night. Spinning gatherings are work parties disguised as gossip sessions. Wool becomes yarn, while talk becomes insulation for the spirit. The spindle sings its soft descending note. Hands draft fibre by lamp glow. A child sleeps inside a circle of elbows. A grandmother tells a story of a winter so cold that breath froze on the inside of the door and fell like glass when morning opened it. Modern comparison. This is your medieval co-working space with better snacks and worse chairs. The pay is yarn and a warmer bed. Neighbour help includes architecture. A man leans to the wall and taps listening for hollow places where frost has licked away daub. Tomorrow he'll come with a basket of clay and straw, and a little dung, do not gasp. The mixture works like a charm, and together you'll smear the wall with new skin. We could do it now, he says, if the saints lend us fingers by the dozen. You laugh because you can feel your fingers already filing a complaint. Another proposes stuffing more straw under the door threshold, then shows how to braid it tight so feet won't pull it loose. Each lesson is small. Their sum is shelter. Neighbours do math with heat. The elder with the sharpest elbows gets the lucky tile at her knees. The smallest child swaps places with one who runs warm as a bread oven. A borrowed cat no one truly owns, Cats chooses a lap in exchange for per-based rent. Someone lays a spare cloak over the bed curtain rod, lowering a tent of fabric that cinches the room tighter. It is a choreography you practice without a caller. The steps are old, the tune is winter. Now a soft, slightly irreverent joke, you declare the lane between your cottage and your neighbours the warmth road because everything useful seems to commute on it. Pots, tales, advice, and occasionally a heroic hen who refuses to stay in her own byre. The hen struts past your threshold now as if conducting an inspection. Union rules, someone says, and everyone wheezes quietly. Laughter as ever is a draught stopper. More formal channels appear at the edge of this warmth. You remember the abbey's almonry window low and discreet where a brother passes out bread at noon, and sometimes a ladle of pottage in deep winter. The abbey's herb garden dried enough sage to make a village-sized cup. On feast days, the churchyard hosts a soul loaf distribution, in memory of the dead whose names sound like weathered bells. Are these scenes universal? No. Do they exist often enough to become the stories winter tells itself? Yes. Historians still argue whether such generosity could keep famine at bay, or merely blunt its teeth. The truth in your hands weighs about as much as half a loaf, and is for tonight sufficient. Loose ends still bind. You loan a length of twine and receive in return a promise of help with the roof when the next thaw pulls at the ridge. You pass along a scrap of advice you learned from a mason on the road, how to tilt a shingle just so to shed sleet, like geese shed rain. The neighbour takes it the way people take small medicine, grateful, sceptical, ready to test. Your village is an experiment that never ends and yet somehow always works. But help has shadows because all things in winter do. The same door that admits stew also admits gossip. The same borrowed blanket carries scent stories and occasionally passengers with too many legs. You know this, and you keep a tolerant truce with it, because the alternative is loneliness, and loneliness is colder than draughts. Which leads to the unglamorous truth you're already itching to mention, and trying not to, because it will ruin the romance of stew and spinning. When people gather close to share warmth, other creatures gather too, and they do not contribute to the pot. The visitors settle the pot on your table to keep it warm for later, tuck the new linen where fingers fret the blanket's edge, and promise to return at dawn with a ladder and a coil of thatch. The latch lifts. Night re-enters star-sharp and honest. The last voice in the doorway says, "Sleep tight." You answer, and keep your elbows to yourself, and everyone smiles at the old joke that may or may not be about bed ropes. The hut grows quiet again, swollen slightly with the extra heat of company that lingers in the air like the aftertaste of clove. You lie back down, and the village lies down with you invisibly like a second blanket stitched of voices and favours. It would be perfect, this shared warmth, if it didn't also itch. You feel it now, the tiny undeniable suggestion that something besides the cat is interested in your ankle. Community is a fine quilt, you think, but some threads crawl. The next lesson of winter nights unfolds with an embarrassed cough, and a very small, very persistent orchestra you cannot ignore. You itch, and the itch is democratic. It does not care if you're a child elder or the family cat that insists on sleeping by your toes. The tiny kingdom of night includes citizens you did not invite, fleas, lice, bedbugs, and the occasional beetle brave enough to try your straw mattress as a winter resort. In a way, they are the truest peasants living as close to the soil as possible, surviving on scraps utterly persistent. You scratch under your cap curse softly, and remember that the cold is not your only enemy. Mainstream fact first. Medieval people lived with parasites as an accepted nuisance. Fleas thrived in straw bedding. Lice colonized hair and seams of linen shirts and bedbugs, though less mentioned in records, surely travelled in cracks and fabrics. Period documents complain constantly, monks scratching through sermons, noble ladies sighing about pesty creatures, physicians prescribing vinegar baths or herbal washes. No class was immune. Castles had more curtains to hide them. Huts had more straw to feed them. The poor scratched openly. The rich hired servants to pick nits discreetly. Quirky tidbit people tried every trick. Sprinkling ashes in bedding, scattering mint or lavender in the rushes, rubbing garlic on door frames, even sleeping with small bags of herbs around the neck. Some mothers sewed a clove of garlic into a child's cap so the lice would choke. Whether lice actually choked is unlikely. But belief is half the cure, especially when scratching is the other half. Cats and dogs carried their own cargo of fleas, adding to the indoor festival. One 15th century satire even joked that fleas were God's way of keeping peasants awake for prayer. You disagree violently at 3 a.m. Tonight's sensory anchor is the small orchestra of scratching subtle, rhythmic involuntary, nails against linen, the faint rasp of a comb through hair, the sigh of someone giving up and just living with it. The sound blends with the straw's rustle, the cow's sigh, the bell's distant hum. It becomes part of the night's soundtrack, one more instrument in the peasant symphony. Historians still argue about how severe the problem really was. Were infestations constant, or were there periods of relief after major washings, or when fresh straw was brought in? Archaeological studies of combs from medieval sites show they were often thick with nits suggesting lice were endemic. Yet we also know people valued cleanliness more than stereotypes suggest regular combing, occasional bathing linen laundered when possible. The truth may lie in between. Parasites were common but not always overwhelming. Still, anyone who spent a night on straw knew the feeling of something crawling where it had no invitation. You reach for your wooden comb, the kind sold in markets for pennies, its teeth set close. By lamplight earlier, you dragged it through your hair, snapping little bodies you pretended not to notice. Some families heated combs briefly to kill what they caught. Others washed combs in strong-smelling brews of rosemary or vinegar. A child might be set to knit duty, scanning a sibling's head by firelight fingers nimble and unsentimental. Laughter sometimes broke out when the nitpicking turned into tickling. Humour softened what dignity lost. There is a small wry comparison to make here. Your bed is as alive as the village itself. You share heat, breath, and unfortunately pests. They are uninvited neighbours, squatters in the Republic of Straw. But just as with human neighbours, you manage a little tolerance, a little swatting, a little prayer. The alternative, complete eradication, was not realistic. You did not have chemical-sealed mattresses or weekly laundry machines. You had nails, combs, herbs, patience. The war was waged not for victory, but for stalemate. A joke slips through, someone scratches their arm and mutters, "At least the fleas are warm." Another replies, "Maybe we should knit them hats." You laugh because laughing warms the ribs, and because fleas are easier to suffer when you mock them. Sarcasm is another herb in the apothecary of survival. Parasites also shaped sleeping arrangements. Families sometimes rotated bedding, shaking straw outside to dump colonies into the frost, believing cold killed them, which it sometimes did. Some set beds near smoke in the day, letting fumes drive out pests. Others kept pets close, believing animals pulled fleas off humans, a mixed blessing, as the animals returned the favour in kind. Historians debate whether these were truly effective methods or just seasonal placebos. What is clear is that every hut contained both humans and hitchhikers, and every dawn began with a scratch. The itch keeps you from sinking fully back into sleep. You know the village will rise tomorrow and tell stories how fleas were worse last year, how lice prefer blonde heads, how St. Anthony protects against bedbugs, though not always on Thursdays. You will comb again, sprinkle herbs again, laugh again. It is tedious, but tedium itself is a shield. Repeat the rituals, and you get through winter one scratch at a time. You close your eyes, ignoring the tickle on your scalp. You tell yourself it is only your imagination. But the truth remains: the bed is not empty, the blanket not exclusive, and warmth is never without cost. You will need something else to help you sleep, something less itchy and more mysterious. And so, as your hand rests near a sprig of garlic hung by the bedpost, you remember the charms and superstitions whispered in the village, the invisible guardians people swore kept evil out of the straw. You roll onto your side, scratching just enough to admit defeat, and stare at the rafter where a small bundle of herbs dangles tied with twine. It sways slightly in the draught, a shadow puppet in the dark. Superstition sleeps beside you as comfortably as any cousin, and in winter the bed belongs as much to charms as to children. Cold you can understand, wolves you can fight, but spirits and nightmares require other defences. In the quiet, the hut is not just wood and stone, but a theatre where unseen things might enter unless you hang the right token on the right beam. Mainstream fact first: medieval people mixed religion, folklore and daily routine seamlessly. Protective charms were common: garlic plats by the door, iron knives tucked under pillows, carved crosses chalked on beams, rush crosses from Candlemas, woven and saved above beds. Holy water sprinkled corners, saints' names were muttered like passwords. Amulets, even crude ones, were worn by peasants as well as nobles. A dried herb bundle might be said to keep away fever, a prayer whispered at midnight might keep wolves from the yard, and a painted charm on the door might bar demons. To modern eyes, these were separate categories: medicine, faith, magic. To medieval eyes, they were one thing: survival. Quirky tidbits: some households placed shoes or bits of clothing inside walls or under floors as protective offerings. Archaeologists still find them: a child's shoe sealed in plaster, a mitten hidden in a loft believed to trap evil spirits the way a cobweb traps flies. Others tied red thread around wrists or hung rowan branches over cradles. There's even record of people whispering a pig's name backward to ward off bad dreams, an odd bedtime ritual if ever there was one. Did it work? Who can say? But if you believed it, you slept warmer. Tonight's sensory anchor is sight, even in near darkness, the faint outlines of charms in shadow. the herb bundle dried and rustling, the small wooden cross etched into the bedpost, the glint of a little iron knife stuck discreetly into the wall. The hut smells faintly of garlic, of sage, burned earlier, of wax from the last candle stub. Together these form a sensory shield. Whether spirits or nightmares truly test the walls, your mind believes in their guardianship, and belief itself can be as warming as wool. Historians still argue how deeply peasants believed in charms versus how much was simple habit. Were garlic bundles really apotropaic or just convenient kitchen storage? Did families hang herbs more for scent and pest control than for spirits? Folklore studies suggest both. Superstition rarely needs pure belief. It thrives on the comfort of action. You hang something, you mumble something, you do something. That something assures you that you are not powerless. In a life where winters are long and nights full of noises you cannot name, power is priceless. The bed itself becomes a charm. Mothers mutter protective prayers over babies as they tuck them in, making the straw a fortress. Fathers might spit once over the threshold before lying down, a symbolic barrier. A grandmother whispers the Lord's Prayer, but half in Latin, half in dialect, weaving sacred and folk words together like straw in a mat. You don't question the mix. You inherit it the way you inherit your cloak or your roof. Humour finds its place even here. Someone teases that the herb bundle above your head is mostly mint to hide your breath. Another says the garlic is meant to ward off your uncle's snores, not devils. The room chuckles softly, comforted not only by the joke but by the act of laughing at fear. Laughter makes spirits smaller, even if it doesn't make them leave. There is another layer: dreams. Nightmares in winter feel sharper, maybe because hunger and cold weigh on the mind. People believe charms can shape dreams: rowan for protection, rosemary for clarity, even a horseshoe nail under the pillow to pin down wandering spirits. You remember a neighbour who swore that if you said the creed backward before bed, no ghost could ride your chest at night. Historians catalogue these practices with fascination, but rarely agree on how widespread each was. You know that when the night presses hard, even skeptics will try something. Another scholarly debate: to what extent did the church tolerate these practices? Priests often preached against superstition, urging pure prayer instead. Yet records show priests themselves blessing herbs, sprinkling holy water, and advising charms so long as they bore the sign of the cross. Was it heresy, or simply the blurred edge of piety? In practice, villagers nodded politely in church, and then hung their charms at home. Faith is wide, walls are porous, the hut creaks, the wind sighs, the garlic swings slightly. You close your eyes and let yourself believe the guardians are working, and perhaps they do not against spirits maybe, but against despair. Because despair is the coldest draught of all. With a charm above your head you can rest a little easier, trusting that something, even if invisible, stands watch. Still, the night is long, and even with charms you're not always asleep. There is a rhythm to waking and sleeping, a pattern that divides the darkness into two halves. It is not modern insomnia, but medieval normalcy, segmented sleep, when families rose, prayed, whispered, even worked before lying down again. And as your body stirs as the hut shifts, you sense the next lesson, that the night itself was never one block but two, and peasants lived in the interval between. You stir again, not because of a flea this time or the creak of the roof, but because your body has decided it is time. Time not for mourning, not yet, but for the pause between. This is the interval historians now call segmented sleep, two halves of rest separated by a watchful wandering hour. For you, it feels as natural as breath. You don't even question why you've woken in the dark. It is simply what bodies do when straw cold and community organise the night differently than clocks ever will. Mainstream fact first records from medieval Europe as well as diaries from early modern households describe first sleep and second sleep. Families slept for a few hours after dusk, woke near midnight, then slept again until dawn. In between, people prayed, whispered, tended fires if there were any checked animals, or shared conversations too private for daylight. Physicians even prescribed the practice, claiming the interval was healthy for digestion, fertility, and the soul. For peasants, the rhythm was both practical and cultural, bodies aligned to candle economy work demands and the long stretch of winter darkness. You rise on your elbow, the blanket sliding enough to make you hiss at the cold, and you hear others shifting too. A cough, a mutter, a whispered prayer. Someone sits up, fully rubbing eyes, fumbling for the pot in the corner. Another, more devout or simply restless, folds hands and murmurs the paternoster. The night feels less like failure to sleep, more like a shared intermission. Tonight's sensory anchor is this liminal hush, a chorus of sighs and whispers, the sound of bare feet, testing the cold floor, the faint scratch of quill on parchment if someone is literate enough to write by lamplight. Quirky tidbits: some believe that the interval between sleeps was the best time for dreams, visions, and even prophecies. Manuals advised that prayers said then carried extra weight closer to angels' ears. Others used the time practically mending clothes by embers, checking that the buyer hadn't frozen, even slipping to neighbours' huts for whispered trysts. Court records exist of cases where such midnight visits resulted in gossip or scandal, proving the pause was not only holy but human. Children often woke too, playing softly or asking for stories before drifting back. There is debate here too. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep was universal or mostly regional. Some claim it was nearly ubiquitous in pre-industrial societies, where artificial light was scarce. Others suggest it varied with latitude and season. Longer nights encouraged the pattern, shorter nights compressed it. Diaries from France, England, even colonial America mentioned first and second sleep. Anthropologists find echoes in non-European cultures. But the truth is, peasants like you did not label it academically. You simply lived it. You knew when the first sleep ended by the churn of your own stomach, the looseness of your limbs, the odd alertness in the dark. Tonight the interval is brief, but alive. Your mother whispers a charm over your little sister's head. Your father checks the shutter, nudging straw tighter against the crack. Someone lights a stub of candle, its glow so modest it seems embarrassed, but enough to guide the threading of a needle through a torn sleeve. Work is quiet, but real mending planning, even kneading dough set to rise by the fire's ghost. The hut breathes activity without bustle, like a cat stretching without rising. A little humour softens the solemnity. Your uncle, half awake, insists he dreamed of a feast where the bread ran away on chicken legs. Someone replies that he probably just heard the hens in the rafters. Laughter stirs the bed, but softly mindful not to wake the babies. Jokes at this hour are like herbs in a brew, small potent warming. The interval also serves intimacy. Couples sometimes talk then when children sleep too heavily to eavesdrop. The hour belongs to secrets, plans for tomorrow, memories of the last festival, hopes for spring. Some even claim conception was more likely after first sleep when the body was rested but not sluggish. Physicians of the time nodded sagely. Whether they were right, who knows? But in a world with few moments of privacy, the middle of the night offered one. Theologically, priests recommended prayers in this hour. Monastic bells far off sometimes roused villagers too. You remember hearing them once, the monks chanting matins while your own hut stirred with smaller rituals. 2 choirs, one cloistered, one rustic, both singing into the same night. Some scholars argue this link proves that even peasants absorbed monastic rhythms indirectly. Others say peasants had their own nocturnal traditions long before. You sip from the cup of debate but shrug, it doesn't matter. What matters is that the interval feels correct, as if your body knows something clocks forgot. But the cold prowls during these pauses, catching you when the blanket slips or the straw shifts. You tug the cover back, sigh, and press close to the nearest warm body. You realise that the interval is dangerous too, time enough for chills to enter bones, for the mind to remember hunger, for fear to creep in. That is why you shorten it with activity, prayer, or story. A story told between sleeps is a shield against the long shadow of the night. So you whisper, one half serious, half playful, about a farmer who tricked the frost demon into eating ashes instead of grain. Someone chuckles, someone sighs. The baby rolls but doesn't wake. The interval holds useful and strange. You know that soon the second sleep will descend, heavier, dreamier, less disciplined. But before that, the family has this sliver of time together, awake in the dark, a community inside a community. You feel your eyes blur again, the candle guttering the hut, settling back towards silence. The interval ends as naturally as it began. The body reclaims itself for rest. The breath of the bed deepens. Outside, the wind has shifted, promising frost, and you, aware of it, all know that morning still lurks many bells away. The second sleep will carry you closer, but not without interruptions of its own, because winter insists on filling even dreams with hunger festivals and the hope of fire. When the second sleep lets go at last and the horizon is still iron grey, you remember that winter has one mercy: it sometimes grants reprieve in the form of festivals. For a peasant, a feast day in January or February is more than religion. It is warmth disguised as piety. The night before, you might lie in the straw, listening to bells call out the holy day, and for once the cold feels like a prelude instead of a sentence. The community knows what to do with such nights it gathers. It sings, it burns fuel with shameless extravagance. Mainstream fact first, medieval Europe's calendar was studded with feast days often tied to saints, the church, or agricultural cycles. Winter, though harsh, was dense with holy days. Christmas, Epiphany, Candlemas, St. Bridget's Day, Carnival before Lent. On these occasions, villagers were released at least partially from labour, encouraged to gather at church, and often permitted a little extra food ale or fire. Priests reminded everyone of salvation, but for peasants the practical salvation was the chance to warm up, eat meat, and forget draughts for an evening. You recall the last winter festival, the churchyard lit with torches, snow crunching under boots, children darting like sparks in and out of shadow. Ale flowed more freely, though still weak, and women carried bread baked in shapes of suns or wheels to remind everyone that light would return. A fiddler sawed out tunes that made even stiff legs want to dance. Tonight's sensory anchor is sound, the layered music of a laughter, clapping bells and drums echoing between frozen cottages. For once the hut's creaks and the straw's whispers are drowned out by noise as warm as fire. Quirky tidbit, in some villages peasants rolled great Yule logs into their hearths. At Christmas meant to burn slowly for days. Even in houses without chimneys, people built bonfires in fields, a communal heat lamp for the season. Children leapt over flames as a charm for health. Elsewhere, villagers wore masks of straw or animal hides, during Carnival chasing out winter spirits with rowdy processions. These rituals blurred lines between superstition, religion, and entertainment. Did they truly banish frost? No, but they banished despair, and despair is colder than ice. Food was central. Pottage enriched with a little bacon or dried peas oatcakes fried in fat, or if fortune smiled, a whole goose or pig shared among families. Ale casks were tapped more generously. Some households hoarded herbs to spice festival brews. The sudden richness filled bellies used a thin gruel. For peasants this was not indulgence but insurance. A full stomach made the next week's hunger bearable. Historians still argue how much abundance filtered down to the poorest. Were festivals egalitarian moments of shared plenty, or did elites still hoard the best cuts? Chronicles suggest both. But everyone, rich or poor, got more than they did on an ordinary night. Fire itself was festival. Bonfires in the square turned villagers into silhouettes against orange light. The cold fled in widening rings around the blaze, and faces flushed with both heat and ale. Children were allowed to stay up late, stamping their feet and chasing shadows. For one night Frost had to negotiate with Flame, and Flame always won until the last ember died. Humour came freely too. Men teased each other in verse, women mocked neighbours with playful riddles, even priests sometimes joined the laughter. Mock trials were staged where winter was accused of cruelty, and spring defended with promises of lambs and blossoms. The verdict was always the same, winter sentenced to leave eventually, though everyone knew it would appeal the case for weeks yet. You laugh remembering it, because laughter makes the cold ridiculous. And yet beneath the joy, a scholar would see the tension. Festivals were sanctioned release valves. The church allowed rowdiness only in measured doses, like spice sprinkled on gruel. Too much noise risked rebellion. Too little risked despair. Feasts were balance, not accident. Still, for the villager wrapped in patched wool, the calculation doesn't matter. What matters is that tonight your toes are warm, your belly full, and your breath fogs in rhythm with song. The afterglow lingers long after the torches dim. You return home with cheeks pink from flame cloaks scented with smoke, and heart heavy with enough cheer to last through the next icy week. You lie in straw that no longer feels hostile, and even fleas seem too drowsy to bite. Festivals teach the body to remember warmth exists. Laughter is possible, food can be shared. Without those lessons, winter would break you. With them you can endure. But festivals do not last. Tomorrow you will rise again to a hut that creaks, a bed that scratches, and a wind that steals warmth faster than you can borrow it. Still joy leaves echoes, and sometimes in the bitter days that follow, you find another source of warmth not in food or fire, but in the sudden sound of children laughing as they stamp across frosted fields, their joy sharper than the cold itself. The festival embers fade, but one thing never quite disappears in winter huts: the quicksilver sound of children. Even on nights when the roof groans under snow and the walls mutter with damp laughter, can flare like a spark and make the cold hesitate at the threshold. You roll onto your side and listen to the smallest ones, their voices tucked into straw and patchwork quilts, giggling at something absurd, perhaps an uncle snores, perhaps a mouse that dared to skitter too loudly. It is not much, but it is a shield, and it warms in ways cloaks cannot. Mainstream fact: first children in medieval villages endured the cold like everyone else, but their playfulness often reshaped it. Even in the depths of winter they found games sliding on frozen ponds, carving little toys from wood, making balls from rags or bladders. Indoors they played knucklebones with sheep bones, sang rhymes, and teased siblings. The noise of children was not simply tolerated, it was treasured because it made huts feel alive. Chroniclers occasionally mention the sound of village children as proof of prosperity. Where there are voices, there is survival. The hut tonight is warmer because of them. A toddler burrows under blankets until only a cap shows, then pops out with a triumphant squeal. Older siblings roll eyes but smile, tucking the little one back in. A girl whispers a rhyme learned from a neighbour, half charm, half tongue twister, and the children giggle at the way words knot themselves. Tonight's sensory anchor is not cloth or scent, but sound, childish laughter, sharp and light bouncing against stone and straw until the whole hut seems brighter. Quirky tidbits, and parents told children that laughing in the night confused evil spirits who disliked joy and would flee. Others said it helped keep wolves away. Wolves apparently preferred silence to giggling. Whether true or not, the idea turned children's natural mischief into a communal defence. Even the priest would admit that joy, however small, was holy in its own way. You find yourself half believing it. Laughter does feel like an amulet, but there is more beneath the mirth. Historians still argue how much of childhood in the Middle Ages was truly carefree. Many children worked from a very young age fetching water, tending geese, scaring birds from fields, spinning wool with tiny fingers. Winter offered less outdoor labour, which meant more indoor games, but also meant more chores by lamplight. Some scholars argue that play was only a fragment between tasks. Others say children carved joy from every pause. Tonight, watching siblings tease and sing, you see both their laughter as bright, but their hands are already calloused. The cold still prowls, yet it retreats a little when joy takes the stage. Even fleas seem less irritating when a child turns scratching into comedy. One boy pretends to duel invisible knights made of lice, scratching furiously and declaring victory. His sister claps and laughs until her sides ache. The adults smile wearily, half amused, half resigned, but the hut's air grows lighter. Humour, even childish, is contagious warmth. Jokes drift among the straw. A child whispers that the cows in the byre are telling stories of silly humans who wear too many hats. Another insists the cat snores louder than grandfather. The laughter muffled under blankets spreads like fire under ash. You realise that the very act of laughter is energy spent against despair. The hut is still cold, but it is no longer quiet, and quiet is when despair slips in. Scholars note that folk tales often included children as bringers of hope in winter. Tales where a poor child tricks frost or a clever daughter finds warmth by wit. These were not random, they reminded villagers that even the smallest voices mattered. The story you tell tonight is simple. A boy who shared his last crust with a bird who sang while he shivered, and who was rewarded with spring arriving early. Did it ever happen? Probably not. Does it help? Definitely. The laughter fades slowly like embers settling, but the warmth lingers. Children curl into bundles, hiccuping the last of their giggles, and soon their breath evens out. You lie there grateful for the interruptions, knowing that without it the night would feel much longer. In truth, joy is one of the peasants' few luxuries, and it costs nothing but permission. Yet the cold still presses at the shutters, still prowls at the edges. Laughter is a shield, but shields can only hold so long. Soon you will need another defence, one older and steadier, the telling of stories spun in the dark when fire has died. Stories are the village's second hearth, and when the last giggle fades, you know someone will clear their throat and begin. The last giggle fades and silence tries to creep back in. But villagers have always known what silence becomes in winter, an open gate, for fear a field where despair sows its seeds. So someone clears their throat in the straw dark and a story begins. The words are low and slow, spun out in rhythm with the hut's breathing, and suddenly the room is warmer, not because the temperature has changed, but because the night has been given shape. Mainstream fact, first storytelling was the primary entertainment of medieval peasants, especially in winter, when work slowed and nights stretched long. Without books in most households, tales lived orally passed from elder to child, neighbour to neighbour. They were practical, teaching morals, remembering ancestors, reinforcing religion, but also deeply communal. Stories filled the hours when the fire was low or gone, when the roof whispered and the cold prowled. Monks and chroniclers wrote down some versions, legends of saints, fables, miracle tales, but what peasants told in huts was often simpler ghost stories, animal trickster tales, or local legends that mixed truth and invention until no one could separate them. Quirky tidbit, some villages believed certain stories could literally create warmth. One tale said that retelling the legend of St. Bridget's cloak would add wool to blankets. Another claimed that if you told a ghost story in winter, the ghosts themselves would shiver, leaving your house in peace. Even riddles were said to stir the air, keeping minds sharp so bodies forgot their cold. Was this magic, or just humour? Likely both. Storytelling blurred lines between entertainment ritual and survival. Tonight's sensory anchor is voice. The cadence of speech in the dark is its own blanket, the crackle of consonants, the long hum of vowels, the pauses heavy with listening. Each word lands softly on straw and wool, layering warmth in syllables. The smell of herbs above the faint snore of the cow, the rafter creaking, they all become part of the story's stage. Your eyes close, but your ears stay open, catching each phrase like sparks flying off a hidden fire. Historians still argue about what peasants' storytelling really sounded like. Did they repeat the same tales faithfully, or did each teller embellish freely? Records of folk tales suggest both the skeleton of the story remained constant, but details, names, jokes, moral emphases shifted with each telling. One night the wolf is grey, another night he's white. One winter, the trickster is a fox, another, it's the neighbour's goat. The adaptability was the point. Stories grew with the listeners fitting the night as clothes fit the body. The tale tonight is about frost itself. The elder begins once there was a spirit who walked the fields with a silver staff touching windows so they flowered with ice. He was cruel until a clever girl offered him a bowl of steaming broth. The spirit laughed, the broth froze solid, but the girl pretended to drink and said it was delicious. Outwitted, the frost spirit promised to leave her village one day earlier than the others. Everyone chuckles softly at the trick, half wishing it were true. Humour threads through even the spookiest stories. Someone interrupts to ask if the frost spirit ever paid for his broth. Another mutters that spirits never bring their own spoons. Laughter again, muffled but real. In this way, the story does double duty. It entertains and it warms, but stories also instruct. Embedded in the frost tale is a lesson about cleverness over strength, kindness disguised as trickery, and the importance of sharing even when food is scarce. Stories are textbooks without parchment, carrying forward lessons so subtle that children absorb them without noticing. You remember learning when to laugh, when to gasp, when to hold breath, all from listening. The hut itself becomes a classroom where heat is measured in imagination. Another debate from scholars: were peasant stories mostly secular, or were they drenched in religion? Evidence suggests both. Saints' miracles were retold with the same gusto as animal fables. The Virgin Mary might appear in one tale, a talking fox in the next. To villagers, the line didn't matter. Sacred and silly could sit side by side because both served the same purpose: to make the night bearable. The story winds on words layering like straw in a mattress. A child drifts to sleep before the ending. Someone else whispers a riddle to keep wakefulness going. What has a bed but never sleeps? The answer is a river, but no one rushes. The riddle itself is warmth enough. You lie back, feeling the blanket heavier with shared imagination. Stories are a second fire, fueled not by wood but by breath and memory. Even when the teller falls quiet, the warmth lingers. Yet you know stories alone cannot fill every hunger. The night has another edge sharper than cold and longer than darkness, the ache of empty stomachs. And as you close your eyes, you feel your belly growl softly, reminding you that the next lesson in winter survival is not about laughter or charms, but about how peasants ate when the world outside was barren. Your belly growls in the straw, and you remember cold is cruel, but hunger is crueler still. No matter how many blankets you pile or charms you hang, if your stomach is hollow, the night becomes longer, teeth chattering and dreamless. You pull the blanket closer, but the ache inside insists on speaking. In winter, peasants fought the cold by eating not luxuriously, but cleverly, turning the barest scraps into fuel. Mainstream fact first, the medieval peasant diet in winter was heavy on preserved foods and grains. Bread pottage, a thick stew of grains and vegetables, ale and cheese formed the backbone. Fresh vegetables were scarce meat, rarer still, unless slaughtered in late autumn and salted or smoked for later. Most evenings, supper was a warm but humble bowl of pottage thickened with oats, peas, beans, or cabbage. It provided calories to fuel the body's furnace through the night. The phrase meat and drink didn't just mean luxury, it meant warmth. Quirky tidbit: in some places, villagers deliberately ate onions before bed, believing their heat in the stomach could fight cold. Others drank a concoction of hot milk and egg, if they could spare, either as a nighttime tonic. Certain regions swore that black bread, dense rye, or barley loaves sat heavier, and therefore kept you warm longer. It may not have been far from the truth-heavy, slow-digesting food, provided longer-lasting energy, even if it also felt like a stone in the gut. Tonight's sensory anchor is taste and texture. Imagine a clay bowl of steaming pottage thick as mud, flavoured faintly with leeks, a bit of bacon rind floating like treasure. You blow on it, sip, and the heat floods into you. The flavour is earthy, humble, but in the dead of winter it tastes like defiance. A crust of bread dunked into the bowl becomes sponge and spoons soaking up the last warmth. It is not a feast, but it is a shield. Historians still argue how much meat peasants actually ate. Some records suggest very little except on feast days. Others point to salted pork, bacon, grease, or fish as more regular presences. What is clear is that protein was rare and treasured. Even bones were boiled twice, then gnawed for marrow. Nothing was wasted. Hunger teaches thrift more effectively than sermons. Humour finds its way even into hunger. Someone jokes that tonight's pottage tastes just like last night's but older. Another claims the fleas in the bed eat better than the people. Laughter bubbles brittle but real, and the pottage goes down easier. In winter huts, a joke was seasoning and jokes were free. The meal is communal. Families gather around a single pot, each dipping wooden spoons, children waiting for parents to blow on their portion. On desperate nights, a pot is passed between households, each contributing what they can, one with beans, one with cabbage, one with a scrap of fat. Out of scarcity, a kind of alchemy, a stew that tastes of everyone's survival. Scholars sometimes call this potluck in retrospect, though for you, it is simply necessity baptized as custom. Storage is always in the background. You think of the salted herring hanging in the loft, the dried peas rattling in their sack, the turnips shrivelling but still edible in the pit outside. Each item is a calculation: use it tonight, or save it for worse nights ahead. The fear of famine hovers constantly, sharpening every spoonful. You eat not just to be full, but to argue with tomorrow. A scholarly debate still flickers in the lamplight: did peasants truly starve each winter, or only in bad harvest years? Some chroniclers painted a picture of constant famine. Others note stretches of modest sufficiency. Archaeology of bones suggests malnutrition was common but not universal. The truth again is in the middle: hunger was always a shadow, sometimes distant, sometimes seated at the table. Tonight it sits beside you, but it is quieted briefly by hot grain and broth. As you scrape the last crust through the pot, you feel the warmth of food spreading outward, joining the blanket, and the body's adding one more layer. Sleep will come easier with something in the belly. Still, you know food is not always enough. Some nights the hunger wins and you must find other comforts. That is why peasants learned to use stories, charms, laughter, and even dreams as part of their survival. And sometimes the hunger itself found its way into dreams, visions of feast tables, of endless loaves, of steaming pots that never emptied. You curl back into the straw, the memory of broth still warm on your tongue. The hut breathes slowly, animals huff. Children sigh, but your mind, half full and half hungry, begins to wander into the strange landscapes of winter. Dreams places where cold and hunger take on shapes and where survival is rehearsed in story worlds long before dawn. The stew is gone, the bowl's licked clean, and the hut slips back into quiet. You lie down again, belly humming faintly with borrowed strength, and soon the thin veil of sleep returns. But winter dreams are not the idle kind. They are shaped by hunger, by cold, by the sounds and smells of the night. They become a second kind of history, one told not by priests or chroniclers, but by the restless theatre of your own mind. Mainstream fact first: medieval people took dreams seriously. They were thought to be messages from God, temptations from the devil, or reflections of bodily humours stirred by what you ate and drank. Physicians wrote entire treatises linking dreams to digestion, arguing that onions caused nightmares and cheese-inspired visions. The Church often cautioned against trusting dreams too much, but saints' lives overflowed with holy dream visions. For peasants, the meaning was less theological and more practical. Dreams explained what life already shouted: fear of famine, hope for spring, or the comfort of abundance. The dream that claims you tonight is no accident. You see a table long and impossible, covered with bread that replenishes itself as hands tear into it. Pots steam endlessly, and meat glistens as if winter had surrendered all its cruelty. You know it is not real, yet you feel your chest loosen, your hands steady. Hunger makes the imagination hospitable to miracles. Children laugh around the dream table, their faces flushed not with cold, but with firelight. You reach for a loaf, and for once in this fleeting space, no one stops you. Quirky tidbit medieval dream books, popular even among common folk who could not read but heard them recited, listed interpretations for symbols. To dream of fire meant passion or danger. To dream of bread meant prosperity or God's grace. To dream of wolves could signal enemies or famine. Even farmers swapped interpretations. One neighbour swore that dreaming of cows meant good milk, yield another that it meant storms. Sometimes the meaning mattered less than the act of sharing the dream in the morning, making everyone laugh or worry together. Dreams became community property, like bread baked in a communal oven. Tonight's sensory anchor is vision, the surreal glow of endless food, the way dream candles never gutter the smell of herbs and meat, richer than anything in your real pot. You know it is fantasy, but your body reacts as if nourished. Warmth seeps into limbs. The fleas are forgotten, the damp walls ignored. You're feasting on hope disguised as story. Historians still argue whether peasants used dreams deliberately to cope with hardship, or whether modern scholars are reading too much into sparse evidence. Some accounts show people recounting dreams of abundance during hungry months, as if to mock scarcity. Others point to sermons warning against false comfort from dreams, proof that such comforts must have been common. The truth, as always, is layered dreams were both amusement and theology, survival tool and superstition. Someone stirs beside you and mutters in sleep, perhaps caught in their own banquet. Another chuckles faintly, still dreaming. The communal bed becomes a shared dreamscape, many imaginations flickering together. A child cries softly, then is soothed, and soon even their breathing slips back into rhythm. The hut becomes not just a shelter, but a stage where dozens of private visions play in the same dark. A little humour sneaks in even here. You dream of a roast goose so fat it waddles off the table, chased by peasants with wooden spoons. The dream self laughs, and you wake with a smile. Someone asks what amused you, and you mutter, "The goose escaped." They chuckle drowsily. Even half-asleep humour remains a blanket. Dreams end as dawn insists on its rights. The horizon whitens, and roosters never good with clocks start their ragged chorus. The hut wakes stiff but alive. You stretch, scratch, sip from the last of the ale. The cold still waits outside, but the night has been survived once again, and in survival lies victory. Yet one more thought lingers as you prepare to rise. The night is never simply endured. It is engineered through straw beds, shared warmth, heated stones, herbs, charms, laughter, stories, food, and even dreams. Each was a tool in the peasant's quiet arsenal, each as vital as walls or roofs. Historians may tally possessions and yields, but true wealth in winter was measured in tricks of warmth and tricks of spirit. The second sleep ends. Morning chores beckon muck to clear animals, to feed bread to bake. But for now you sit on the edge of the straw bed, feeling both exhausted and triumphant. You have once again survived a night without fire, and now as our long journey through the frozen night comes to a close, let's slow everything down. Imagine the hut again, but quieter. No laughter, no chores, no fleas. Not even a whisper of wind, just the steady breathing of sleepers, the straw sighing softly as bodies sink deeper into it. The air is still cold, yes, but it feels different now, less like an enemy, more like a blanket of silence draped over the whole village. Picture the animals too. The cow in the corner shifts once, then settles into absolute stillness. The cat curls tighter, its paws tucked under its chin, purring, reduced to a faint vibration you barely hear. Even the rafters above stop creaking, as if the house itself has finally found a rhythm of rest. Let your mind drift through these layers of calm. First the straw beneath you, dry and forgiving. Then the wool at your shoulders, scratchy but loyal. Then the air itself, cool and steady, pressing gently on your cheeks. Each layer settles heavier, softer, slower, until you feel yourself sinking through the hut into the earth, into quiet. Your thoughts, too, grow slower. They no longer rush to the chores of tomorrow or the worries of hunger. Instead, they trickle like a winter stream, steady and unhurried. Even memory feels softened, less sharp, more like a story you heard long ago. So rest now. Let the night be complete. Let the bells wait until morning, the chores wait until daylight, the cold wait at the door. For now there is nothing left to do but breathe and let that breath carry you further and further into stillness.